Marvel with ZANPAKUTOU. Chapter 601, The Truth. First of all, one thing had to be clear. That was that Hollow's birth was not a coincidence, but a product of years of suffering, ultimately losing the soul after the fall of the heart. After the soul fell, a black hole would appear on its chest, indicating that it had lost the heart of a human, and its face would be covered by a white bone mask. Only at this step would it be determined to be the real Hollow. However, the four Hollow in front of him seemed to be a little different from the Hollow he knew of. The masks on their faces were not complete. They only covered half of their faces. Moreover, there were no holes in their chests. The overflowing spiritual power gave off a chaotic feeling, as if he was a half-finished product. "Oh, you can actually see us." The biggest one among them, Hollow, noticed Tony's strange expression and revealed a sinister smile. "This is perfect. You can feel how terrifying we are and experience how powerful humans are after evolution." The one who spoke was the man named Eric. He was the most muscular of them all, Hollow. He was twice as tall as the others and was about 5 or 6 stories tall. Among these Hollow, his mind and rationality were considered to be one of the more complete ones. The evolved humans. Tony raised his eyebrows and looked at them in surprise. As he muttered these words, he suddenly seemed to understand. "So you don't know that your current state is actually a product of the fallen soul?" "A product of the fallen soul?" Eric was stunned. His chaotic brain did not quite understand the meaning of this sentence. "Don't make people laugh their teeth off. What evolved human?" Tony sneered and shook his head. There was a hint of disdain in his eyes. "A group of defective products that are not even complete, yet they dare to call themselves evolution. Hollow? Fallen by half? Defective products." The new words that came out one after another confused Eric. He felt a strange sense of panic. "What are you talking about? What is Hollow? What is a defective product? Why do you seem to know him so well? You asked me how I found out." The steel armor suddenly broke apart. Tony walked out of the armor without any defense. He tilted his head and smiled. "The reason is that I have already seen a soul creature like this." He actually dared to walk out from inside. Eric felt humiliated and immediately let out an angry roar. "Tony Stark, you actually look down on us and pay the price for your arrogance." A savage beast roar shattered the floor, as if it was the sound of an attack. 4.5 Hollow surrounded Tony in the middle. They all raised their huge fists and smashed them at this arrogant human. The sharp sound of the fist's tip exploding in the air caused the airflow to be shaken and spread out. Bang! The several centimeters thick cement ground was directly smashed by the fist. The terrifying power that surpassed ordinary people by 10 times, even the steel and mixed soil could not withstand it. It let out a cry of cracking and collapsing. It had already been transformed into a ruined villa by missiles and bullets. After the ground was penetrated, a large hole several centimeters in diameter was revealed. However, when the smoke and dust dissipated, Tony and Maya were nowhere to be seen. Just as Hollow was feeling puzzled and looked down through the hole in the floor, he heard a mocking voice. "Yo, are you looking for me?" Eric and the others were shocked and looked at the source of the voice. Tony Stark was dressed in a long black dress, and a long, ordinary-looking sword was hanging at his waist. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at them leisurely with a half-joking and half-mocking look. Just the eye contact alone made Eric feel as if he had died 1,000 times. Spiritual power, which was naturally revealed from Tony Stark, exuded a pressure as heavy as the sea, making it difficult for these semi-hollow to even breathe. It was like facing a predator at the top of the food chain, and could be torn apart and devoured at any time. Was this guy really a human? Eric's confused mind could not understand what was happening in front of him. "I forgot to tell you." Tony looked at them with a fake smile. Then, he slowly said, "I am no longer a human. To be more accurate, the current me should be called Death God." One of my usual duties is to kill you, fallen hollow. Kill us. A near-solid atmosphere of death instantly enveloped the heads of a few half-hollow. The cold killing intent that filled the air was like the biting cold wind in winter. The bone-chilling cold that it brought was enough to freeze their souls. Their stiff limbs seemed to have rusted. Even moving their fingers was an extravagant hope. The level of spiritual power on both sides was not in a dimension at all. Just a few half-transformed souls of hollow, in front of the fifth-grade spiritual power, they were as weak as lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Clang dash! ZANPAKUTOU, which was at his waist, slowly unsheathed, reflecting a bright and dazzling light. Fear reached its peak at this moment. The special fluctuations added by ZANPAKUTOU stimulated the skin and depths of their brains, making every nerve let out a crazy wail. All the cells in their bodies were constantly transmitting fear and death. Run! Run! In almost an instant, Eric turned around and ran without hesitation. A sharp gust of wind swept past the back of his head, accompanied by a sharp whistle as swordswind brushed against the air, followed by a heavy sound like something falling and rolling on the floor. Eric did not dare to look back, but he caught a glimpse of it from the corner of his eye. The three heads of hollow were like rubber balls. They were rolling on the floor. The broken neck was as smooth as a mirror. In the eyes of several heads, there was even the ruthlessness of life. It could be seen how sharp and fast sword was. Who dash? The wind of death blew from behind again. No. Don't kill me. I am willing to tell you everything. Please don't kill me. The fear in Eric's heart reached its peak. Although the human rationality that Hollow retained during his transformation could make it stronger than the other half of Hollow, it also meant that it was more afraid of death than the other half Hollow. Chiang! ZANPAKUTOU happened to stop on Eric's neck, and the sharp sword cut through its skin. A trace of penetrating chill seeped into the depths of his heart and travelled along the edge of sword's neck. Eric could not help but rejoice that he had opened his mouth quickly. If he had been a second slower, his head would have been moved. Speak! Tony stepped on Eric's shoulder and placed sword on his neck. He said gloomily, "You only have one chance. If there is anything that I am not satisfied with, then go and accompany your brothers." Feeling the cold touch of sword's blade, Eric swallowed his saliva and said with a trembling voice, "I know a lot of things, including the truth of Mandarin, but you have to promise me that you will let me go after I tell you." "No problem." Chapter 602, One Stone Three Birds. Swear to God? Eric was stunned for a few seconds. This was not a small matter. In the Western faith, God could be said to be a unique existence. After all, it was the common faith of the three great sects in the world, so there were very few people who dared to swear in the name of God. Especially the content of the oath, it was actually so vicious. It was not a casual vow to be burned and pierced in hell. If one had a general understanding of the history of the West, they would know that this vow was targeted at Count Dracula, the rumored traitor who betrayed God and was turned into a monster who had been fed blood and suffered pain. From this, one could imagine the seriousness of Tony's oath. In the Middle East, where the faith was thicker, the punishment for violating the oath of God was more serious. Therefore, Eric subconsciously believed that Tony would not break his promise, so he told the truth he knew in detail. From Eric's description, Tony received a shocking piece of news. Mandarin, who was in control of the Ten Ring Gang, was Aldrich Killian, the founder of AIM and the creator of the Desperate Virus, the collaborator that Maya Hansen spoke of, and the bearded old man who appeared on the television was actually an actor substitute. Using the uniqueness of the death virus, Killian recruited a large number of soldiers who were disabled because of the war. By injecting them with the death virus potion, he created a large number of death-sworn who followed his lead. Moreover, Killian's evil plan was far from over. His real goal was to rob Roddy's war machine, get close to and capture the most authoritative president of the US. From then on, he would be able to control the largest terrorist organization in the dark, and control the most powerful empire in the world. Why did you capture Potts? Tony asked again. Lord Killian said that you are not worthy of having such a good woman as Miss Potts. He wanted you to experience the pain he felt back then. Since it had already been leaked, Eric felt like he was going to throw the bucket away and said, he still needs to inject the death virus into Potts, but he is still working on the potion, so it will take some time. Tony clenched his fists subconsciously and felt that time was pressing. He said, there is one last question. Who turned you into this half-hollow form? No. I don't know. Eric was at a loss, but when he saw the cold glint in Tony's eyes, he shouted in horror, I remember. At the very beginning, we were injected with the death virus and would not be in this state until that day when a person suddenly appeared. A person? Tony narrowed his eyes. Continue. Who is it? It is a woman wearing a white military uniform. Rick swallowed and recalled, she has always been wearing a mask and her whereabouts are very mysterious. We have never seen her appearance. The reason why we can become like this is because of that woman. It really is the Wandenreich. Tony slowly closed his eyes. He already knew who that person was. If he was not wrong, that woman should be the one who kidnapped Potts and injured Peter and Happy at the exposition. She was also the one who caused these people, hollow. But when he thought of Hashwalth, he could not help feeling a little apprehensive. The reason why the Quincy of the Wandenreich suddenly intervened in this matter was certainly not as simple as it seemed on the surface. At least he did not think that the desperate virus alone could attract the behemoth of the Wandenreich. Unless the thing in the hands of Killian could arouse the interest of the Quincy. Otherwise, it was impossible to explain that the Wandenreich, which could compete with Soul Society for 1,000 years and even made him very afraid, would suddenly join hands with the head of a terrorist organization. This was not possible from that side. I've already told you all the secrets. Can you let me go now? Asked Eric carefully, interrupting Tony who was deep in thought. Of course you can . Tony retracted his wandering thoughts and looked at him meaningfully. However, the place you are going to should be the world of the dead. You don't keep your word. Eric instantly understood what he meant and shouted in horror, you have sworn to God. Aren't you afraid that you will break your oath and be sent to hell after you die? I'm sorry. Holding sword, Tony slightly turned his head and said, I am now Death God, not under the control of that old man God. And the most important thing is that no one told you not to believe the words of capitalists. As everyone knew, the words of capitalists were basically nonsense. Not to mention, from the very beginning, Tony had never intended to let go of Eric. Countless people had died under his hands, and if he was let go, it would only cause more harm. It was true that keeping a promise was a virtue, but the premise was that it was based on morality. Eric roared and wanted to fight to the death, but unfortunately, he was destined to do nothing. In the face of absolute strength, no matter how he struggled in the middle, it would not affect the direction of the final outcome. Whoosh! The clear sound of Sword's voice rang out, and a cold light appeared in Eric's eyes. Then, he felt a sense of loss. The scenery in front of Eric was spinning. Suddenly, he widened his eyes and saw the back of his body, as well as Tony, who was standing on his shoulder and sheathing sword. You lied to me. Eric, who only had one head left, stared at Tony with a resentful gaze, as if he could be killed like this. Yes, I lied to you. Tony curled his lips and said coldly, the person I hate the most in my life is you bunch of horrible people. If you want me to let you go, unless God himself comes down to plead for you. In his heart filled with unwillingness and resentment, the half-hollow body disintegrated into spirit particles and dissipated into the air. Looking at the ruined villa, Tony was silent for a few minutes and then calmly said, Jarvis, spread the news that I was attacked by the Ten Ring Gang and then died. Forgive me for being blunt, Mr. Stark. Jarvis was very puzzled by this order and asked, it won't do you any good. If you spread this news without Miss Potts, it will cause a big problem in the group. I want this effect. Tony came to the end and slowly walked into Jigai. He looked at the unconscious Maya Hansen and said, if you want to investigate the Wandenreich, I must disappear from the public's sight. No one will suspect a dead person. Only then will I have the chance to save Potts. Mr. Stark, do you need to inform Shield in advance? Jarvis asked again. Tony thought about it carefully and felt that it was too dangerous to do so, so he shook his head and said, don't inform them for the time being. Freddy should be able to guess. The seriousness of this matter had already exceeded the scope of his control. The powerful Tony of the Wandenreich had long seen it. Destroying a city was an easy matter. He knew that with his own strength, there was no way he could contend against it. Only Soul Society, who represented Laud, had the qualifications to compete with him. But the problem was that Soul Society was also his enemy. Soul Society might not be able to take care of the Wandenreich, but he would definitely be able to take care of this fake. Therefore, he had to grasp the boundaries and guide Soul Society to discover the traces of the Wandenreich through some extremely obscure means without attracting Soul Society's attention. In this way, he could take advantage of the chaos to fish in troubled waters. At the same time as rescuing Potts, he could also destroy Kyrie's plan and shatter the scheme of the Wandenreich. It could be said to be one stone three birds. Let's go to Tennessee. Chapter 603, Infiltration. Good morning, America. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday. It was located in California, at number 10880, the president of the famous entrepreneur Stark Group, Tony Stark's private villa. It was revenged by the terrorist of the Ten Ring Gang. We have reason to believe that the Iron Man Tony Stark has been killed. The police are currently searching the ruins, hoping to find further evidence. The TV hanging on the wall of the convenience store was playing yesterday's news. A person who was dressed very poorly, with disheveled hair and a face like that of a homeless person stopped in front of him for a moment, then turned around to pay the bill, picked up his things, and left the convenience store. After walking for about 10 meters, he turned into a dark path and pushed open a dilapidated door. Inside was a beautiful woman with long brown hair. When she saw the tramp come in, she revealed a smile on her face. The tramp raised his hand to lift up the old fur hood, revealing a familiar face. It was Tony Stark, who was considered dead in the news report. After escaping with the help of fake death, Tony took Maya Hansen and disguised himself as two ordinary vagrants, sneaking into this small town. The reason why he wanted to bring Maya Hansen along was actually a helpless choice. After all, he had to be careful with this plan. If it was accidentally leaked out, he would definitely die. How is it? Have you found any clues? Maya asked. No, there is no one there. Tony shook his head in disappointment and said, Eric didn't tell the truth. At least that place is definitely not the real base. According to the information that Eric had revealed, their base was located in the Rose Bay of Tennessee, in an abandoned villa on the outskirts. However, when Tony rushed over, he found that the place was already empty. There were only traces of people living there, but he had not found the secret base of the Kian. From this, it could be seen that he had been tricked. As for the location of the secret base, even Maya Hansen was not very clear about it, so she could not provide any help in this aspect. This led to him having to reinvestigate the clues. Maya pondered for a moment and suggested, I can contact Killian. Perhaps I can know where his secret base is. Tony hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. This won't do. This is too dangerous. Killian knows that you have betrayed him. He will definitely kill you. I will still look for clues. Maya felt warm in her heart. She said softly, Don't worry. I am the only one who can resolve the symptoms of the terminal virus. I am still useful to him, so he will definitely not kill me. No, this method is too risky. Tony always felt that something was wrong. A person like Killian would never easily let go of someone who betrayed him just because he was controlled by someone. You don't have time, Tony. Although Maya was very moved, she still insisted on her opinion. Don't forget, Potts is still waiting for you. It will take 6 days to prepare the antidote for the virus. You only have 1 day left. After saying that, Tony fell silent. Also, don't forget that we have yet to contact Roddy. It is very likely that he has already been captured by Killian. The president might be in trouble at any moment. Maya threw out another bomb. I am not worried about that. Tony shook his head and sneered, I have already informed Seireitei. I think they will solve this problem perfectly. There is another way, Tony. Maya flicked up a strand of her hair and said with a dark expression, moreover, this was my own fault. I shouldn't have dragged so many people into this. Too many people have already been injured. I don't want to see more people die. Just treat it as atonement and let me make up for it. At that time, the drug that was determined to save people who were disabled due to war or accident was now running in the opposite direction, turning into a desperate virus that caused more people to die. This made Maya Hansen's conscience unable to forgive herself and Killian. That was why she found Tony Stark, hoping to use this method to stop the spread of the virus and stop this cruel experiment and killing. Tony saw the guilt and regret in her heart. As someone who had experienced the same experience and created countless killing weapons, he had also experienced the feeling of being condemned by his conscience. Thus, he could understand the feeling of Maya Hansen at this moment. I understand. In the end, Tony sighed heavily and handed her a metal disc. Take this. It can automatically block a fatal attack for you at the critical moment. Maya Hansen took the metal disc and stuffed it into his arms without even looking at it. I will contact Killian later. You stay here and don't move first. When I am taken to the destination, I will tell you the specific location. No problem. Tony had no objection. The other side had a Quincy. If he followed rashly, it was likely that he would be exposed directly. So it was the best choice to wait for the news in the same place. After leaving the shabby wooden house, Maya changed back to her usual outfit. She deliberately circled around Rose Harbor and went to a telephone booth on the street. Then, she dialed a number. I am Maya. Got it. I will pick you up right away. The sky gradually darkened. The moon and stars were sparse. At this time, about 5 hours had passed since the disappearance of Maya Hansen. During this period, he had not received any news. Tony could not help but let his imagination run wild, worried that something had happened to her. There was still no news from Roddy. He did not dare to contact Shield rashly. He could only pin his hopes on that old fox, Fury. He could understand the information he had left behind. Taking advantage of this period of time, Tony considered it over and over again and decided to reveal some of the information to Lod. He wanted him to be ready to ask for help from Soul Society to deal with the unknown Quincy. However, Tony deliberately kept an eye out and did not directly tell Lod where he was, so as to avoid the situation from going wrong. This guy would push the responsibility away and let him take the blame. After all, that guy had said it himself. If Soul Society found out, he would not admit it. Therefore, Tony had to think carefully, especially when it was time to tell Soul Society. He had to wait until he was safe. Next, it was time to wait. When Maya Hansen sent back the news, determined the secret base of Jilly and Quincy, and rescued Potts and Maya, he could inform Lod and let Soul Society intervene in this matter. Waiting was a very boring thing. Tony was sorting out the information about the death virus while waiting for Maya Hansen. When it was about midnight, Jarvis suddenly received a message. This message was sent to Jarvis' secret database through encryption several times. It was the contact information that he had specially told the other party before Maya left. Tony suddenly became alert. After opening this encrypted message, he found a row of coordinates. After entering the system to locate it, it was the outskirts of the port in Tennessee. It was several kilometers away from the abandoned villa. Found you, Killian. Without another word, Tony immediately put on his mech and activated his stealth mode. Taking advantage of the heavy night, he headed towards the coordinates at full speed. 1 minute later, he arrived at his destination. Below was still an abandoned villa, built in the deepest part of the mountain area. It was an area that ordinary people would not even step into. Through the thermal imaging of the mask, one could see that in the corner of the villa, there were many hidden sentries used for vigilance. The security is so tight, it seems like I did not find the wrong place. Tony touched his chin, thinking about how to sneak in. Mark 42's invisible coating was targeted at radar scanning and could not be blocked by the naked eye, so it was absolutely impossible to sneak in front of so many people. Moreover, the location of these hidden sentries was very particular. According to Jarvis' calculations, no matter how careful he was in the process, there were several hidden sentries blocking the way through the villa. If he wanted to slowly advance from the outside and deal with the hidden sentries along the way, he would also be discovered by the hidden sentries from other angles, which would arouse the vigilance of the inside. So whether it was sneaking in or attacking the two roads, it was basically impossible. The only useful god-killing mech, the invisible coating, could achieve the real invisible effect, but it would have to be Shikai by Herphys, but that would expose his spiritual power, and it would easily attract the attention of the Quincy inside. After thinking about it for a long time, in order to avoid alerting the enemy, Tony decided to give up the mech and sneak in with Death God's spirit form. In this way, he could bypass those hidden sentries. As long as he could control spiritual power's fluctuations and suppress it to the minimum, Tony was confident that even if he killed the Quincy, it would be impossible to find his whereabouts. After making up his mind, Tony took out substitute Shinigami badge, flicked his soul out of his body, and let Jarvis stay in the same place, keeping contact at any time in order to reinforce. Chapter 604, Self-Injection. The infiltration process was very perfect. No one had discovered Tony. And without any special techniques, he walked over in front of everyone. Unless an ordinary person had a certain level of spiritual energy, it was impossible to see the existence of the soul. Although this group of people had been injected with the death virus, their spiritual energy was no different from an ordinary person's. Naturally, they could not see Tony's figure. The furnishings in the villa were slightly different from the dilapidated outside. It could be seen that there was an orderly set of furniture in the well, soft and multicolored Arabian carpet, expensive gold ornaments or antique utensils, as well as some food boxes and empty wine bottles that were thrown around everywhere, and it could be seen that there were people living here. Tony took a deep breath and suppressed the spiritual fluctuations to the minimum, for fear of being discovered by the Quincy. After staying in place for a moment, he was sure that no one had found him, so he carefully continued to explore inside, looking for traces of Mayan Hansen and Killian. Passing through the front hall all the way to the backyard, there was a only room with a light, which caught his attention. Tony tiptoed to the window and looked inside through the gap of the curtain. He found the bearded old man pretending to be an adult. He was playing with a pair of Latin twins. The content of the story was not included in the story, so as not to teach the children. While the bearded old man was playing with the Latin sisters, a well-built and well-armed man suddenly walked in from the other side of the room. He looked at the old man and the pair of sisters with disdain and shouted, "Trevor, get ready. The performance is about to begin." Trevor took off the black cloth covering his eyes and said with a surprised expression, "Didn't you say that we would have to wait a few more days?" The plan went very smoothly. The man sneered and said, "We have already gotten that war machine. It is time to give the president a death warning in advance." "Wow! Trevor exclaimed, then rubbed his hands together like a rascal. He chuckled, "Then is my treatment going to rise again? As long as you perform well, you can have anything you want." The man sneered and said, hurry up and get ready. 2 hours from now, I'll report this to Lord Killian. Tony, who was outside the window, heard this and his eyes lit up. He didn't expect that even God was helping him. He was worried that he couldn't find the secret base, so he ran out and took the initiative to lead the way. As long as he followed this burly man, he would be able to find the mastermind behind all of this, Killian. Thinking of this, Tony immediately sneaked into the room without a sound. Then, relying on the special nature of the soul, he casually followed the burly man and left the room under the eyes of everyone. *T, what are you looking at? The Latin sisters wrapped themselves around the old man and asked in confusion. It's nothing, baby. Trevor looked in the direction where the muscular man had left and revealed a meaningful smile. He turned around and returned to his roguish look. He hugged the sisters and started to lick them. There are still 2 hours left. Let's hurry up. The location of the secret base was extremely hidden and hard to find. FEBNL.com. If he hadn't followed the muscular man and asked him to find it himself, he would have spent a lot of effort. Along the winding tunnel under the villa, they gradually went deeper into the 2 walls. The walls on both sides gradually became wider, and there were many dim yellow light bulbs hanging above their heads. The air was filled with a humid and hot feeling, and there was also a strange smell of a strong burnt meat. Thinking of the characteristic of the terminal virus, it could produce a high temperature that could melt steel. Tony vaguely guessed the source of this smell. It might be the human body that had failed the experiment and was burnt. Suddenly, his stomach was covered with rain, and he almost vomited on the spot. Fortunately, he endured it and hung about 10 meters behind the burly man. Soon they arrived at their destination, and at the end of the passage was a huge room. There were all kinds of experimental equipment inside. There were also many people with broken limbs. They were naked and tied to iron frames. Their bodies were covered with transparent needles, and they were slowly being injected. There was an unknown red sticky liquid. As his line of sight gradually went deeper, Tony's pupils suddenly shrank. On the 2 iron frames in the deepest part of the hall, there was the pots he had been thinking about day and night, as well as the Mayan who had risked her life to come back. Pots. Maya. Tony's heart almost stopped beating. He almost couldn't control spiritual power. The 2 women looked like they were out of water. Their bodies were drenched in sweat. Their eyes were tightly closed as they were hung on the metal frame. Their bodies were like those who were disabled. They were filled with transparent needles filled with unknown liquid. Tony bit his lips hard, trying to calm himself down. If not for the last bit of rationality left in him and the fact that he was still trying his best to suppress him, he would have rushed over and killed these bastards. A blond man in a white suit with a delicate hairstyle attracted his attention. Although that memory was very vague, he still had a vague impression. This person was the mastermind behind the whole thing, Mandarin who truly controlled the 10 Ring gang. Master Killian, I have already informed Master Trevor. The burly man walked over and reported with his head bowed. Well, how are the preparations on Otto's side? Killian nodded slightly and said, the plan is about to start. I don't want our president to miss this wonderful Christmas. The burly man's face was pale. He lowered his head in fear and said with a trembling voice, I'm sorry, Lord Killian. We haven't dealt with Otto yet. That guy is hiding in the armor and won't come out. We are worried about destroying the armor, so. A bunch of trash. Killian snorted in dissatisfaction. A cold light surged in his eyes. You can't even handle such a small matter. What use do I have for you? The burly man lowered his head even deeper, his shoulders trembling slightly, afraid that he would be abandoned by the man in front of him. I'm sorry, Lord Killian. I'll hurry Otto and drag him out of the armor immediately. No need, I'll go myself. Killian narrowed his eyes and ordered the people beside him, continue injecting them with the death virus. I want these 2 to live, understand? Understood, Lord Killian. The two people in charge of injecting the virus nodded in fright. Killian glanced at the two women, then turned around and walked towards the passageway. Tony realized that this was an opportunity. He quickly hid himself on the ceiling and watched as Jillian and the burly man left. After making sure that there was no one nearby, he turned around and locked his eyes on the two scientists. Ho ho! In order to be the fastest, he did not cause any fluctuations. Tony did not choose to use ZANPAKUTOU. Instead, he used the most basic Hakuta body technique. With the advantage of Ho-Ho's high-speed movement, he turned his palm into sword and waved it at the same time, heavily hitting the back of the two scientists. Crack! 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 Two crisp sounds of bones breaking rang out, and the heads of the two scientists drooped down. The muscles and blood vessels on their necks were completely cut off by Tony without mercy by sword. The two of them did not even know what had happened, and they went to that world in a flash of darkness. Facing such a terrifying person, Tony had no intention of showing mercy at all. He would kill everyone he saw. After dealing with the two scientists, he quickly pulled out the tubes on their bodies. Then, he held a woman in one hand and walked toward the window. When he planned to leave this place for the time being, he heard a clear and crisp laughter. The laughter seemed to be in his ears, but it also seemed to be very far away. And along with an invisible pressure, it filled the entire laboratory like a rising tide, emitting a terrifying weight. Tony's pupils suddenly shrank, and his heart seemed to be clenched by an invisible hand. Since you're already here, don't you want to sit for a while before leaving? Chapter 605, Surviving from Death. Tony's heart was filled with endless bitterness and he did not know what to say for a moment. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hildre. The woman crossed her legs and rested her elbows on her knees. Her palms held her delicate chin and she smiled slightly. Nice to meet you, the famous Iron Man Tony Stark. I also want to ask you, is the power of the stolen death god good? How did you know? The moment he said this, it was no less than a shock in Tony's heart. It shocked him so much that his face changed dramatically. He did not expect that the other party not only knew him, but also said that his death god's power came from a bad source. Of course someone told me. Hildre placed her hands on the windowsill and slowly descended. Her long boots lightly stepped on the ground and she said with her hands behind her back, I'll give you two choices. Either you choose to follow me obediently, or you'll be crippled by me and taken away. Which one do you want to choose? Wait. This beautiful and kind lady. Tony hurriedly waved his hand and swallowed his saliva. Before you take me away, can you answer a question for me first? Hildre smiled. She knew that Tony was deliberately stalling for time, but the difference in strength between the two was too great, so she did not care. She nodded and said, yes, but the premise is that I can answer a question. Don't worry, it is not a difficult question. Tony rolled his eyes and seemed to be thinking about a escape plan. He asked, I just want to know, I have clearly suppressed the spiritual fluctuations, how did you find me? You are looking down on Quincy a little too much. Hildre looked at him in surprise and immediately smiled. All the Ryūjin contained in the atmosphere can be controlled by us. Do you think you can hide from my eyes with your little kung fu? The Ryūjin in the atmosphere. Tony widened his eyes. This was the first time he heard of it. He did not expect the ability to destroy the Quincy to be so terrible. I have found you since you stepped into this villa. Hildre continued slowly, the reason why I didn't appear directly was just to play with you. So, do you understand? Understood. Tony gritted his teeth. He knew that Hildre was referring to the huge difference in strength between the two of them. Then, choose. Hildre smiled faintly. Are you willing to come with me, or are you going to be crippled and taken away by me? Can I choose not to leave? Tony quietly pressed a hand on ZANPAKUTOU and grinned. You might not believe me, but I want to be a good man now. From now on, I only love pots, so please forgive me for refusing. Febol.cm. So you want to choose the second option? Hildr was not the least bit surprised by this result. There were faint signs of spiritual power rising around her. It doesn't matter. I know what I'm doing. As long as I break your limbs, I'll try my best to leave you a breath. At this moment, Killian suddenly returned. Because he had been injected with the death virus and his soul had been developed, he could see Tony Stark's death god form. It's you, Tony Stark. Killian was obviously shocked. A person who had already died appeared in front of them. Not only was he alive and well, he almost saved Potts and Maya, the two women, right under their noses. Good evening, Killian. Tony grinned and activated his taunt skill. Your virus is nothing much. It's just a bunch of defective products that can explode at any time. Fortunately, I didn't agree with your proposal at the beginning. Otherwise, wouldn't I have lost my life? Kill him. The veins on his face bulged as he angrily commanded his subordinates, go, kill him for me, don't let him live. The bodies of the carriers of the death virus were burning hot, directly evaporating the water in the nearby air. They turned into white smoke and rushed forward like mad dogs. Tony's expression changed slightly. Although he was not afraid of the death virus, the two women in his arms could not. If these people rushed over and self-destructed, Potts and Maya might be killed on the spot. Shua, Shua, Shua. Just as Tony planned to pull out sword and counterattack, dozens of blue lights flashed in front of his eyes. In the next second, the poisonous bodies that pounced at them like mad dogs were sent flying several times faster and were nailed to the wall. Only then did Killian and Tony see clearly the true body of the azure light. They saw that the chests of those people were pierced by a slender azure arrow, firmly nailed to the wall. They sank several inches deep into the cement, and no matter how they screamed and struggled, they were unable to break free. You! His eyes were filled with anger as he locked onto Hildr. Just as he was about to say something, another blue ray of light brushed past his face and shot into the depths of the wall behind him. The dust and debris that splashed up from his back and the wound on his cheek that had been scratched by the arrow gave him a slight pain. Cold sweat mixed with the blood that was seeping out slowly slid down his fair face to the bottom of his jaw and finally dripped onto the ground. Tony's face was deathly pale as he looked at Hildr in shock. Although he already knew the difference in strength between them, it was only at that moment that he understood how huge the gap was. From the moment Hildr raised her hand to the moment she finished shooting the arrow, he could not even see clearly when it happened. Only when the arrow was completely inserted into the wall did he react. Wasn't this too exaggerated? Tony swallowed his saliva, unable to believe his eyes. You wanted to kill me just now. His voice was trembling. He was even more afraid than Tony. After all, the arrow was aimed at him. If it deviated by half a millimeter, it would be his head that would be pierced. It was just a warning. Hildr smiled as usual. Tony Stark is very important to us. I don't want anyone else to interfere, so if you do it again, prepare to say goodbye to your ambition. Killian was unwilling to accept this. He looked at Tony with resentment and gritted his teeth. I can pay more. As long as you are willing to give Tony Stark to me, the formula for the death virus will be yours. Oh, it seems that I am quite valuable. Tony raised his eyebrows, looked at Hildr, and teased, why don't you think about changing it? Death virus. Exilud sneered. There was a hint of ridicule in her eyes. Don't think too highly of yourself. That kind of rubbish is worthless. Compared to Tony Stark, you guys are nothing but trash. Tony frowned and looked at Hildr in surprise. This matter had progressed to this point. Even a fool could see it. It was definitely not as simple as it seemed. The Wandenreich was not cooperating with Yuri at all. The goal of the Quincy was him from the beginning to the end. No. This is impossible. Killian's mentality suddenly exploded a little. Once again, he was looked down on. It made him recall the scene when he almost committed suicide on the sunrise platform. He shouted in a collapsed voice. Why do all of you value Tony Stark so much? I am clearly better than him. I am the king of this world. You should choose me, not this playboy. Perhaps I am more handsome than you, richer than you, smarter than you, and more powerful than you. Tony boasted shamelessly, and at the same time, stabbed a few more sword in his heart. You seem to have misunderstood something. In the face of the nearly crazy man, Hyldra calmly said, the reason why we want to cooperate with you is to use a more reasonable way to lure Tony Stark away from Lord Karl's surveillance range. Do you understand? Lure me away from Lord's surveillance range. After hearing this sentence, Tony instantly felt a chill all over his body, as if he had fallen into a trap. So you captured Potts to transfer me away from New York and away from Lord Karl. That's right. Chapter 606, Tony Stark's Plan. Can you tell me the reason? Tony suddenly felt a little heavy, feeling as if he had fallen into a big pit. The Wandenreich had worked so hard to cooperate with Killian to get him out of the range of Lod's surveillance. It was definitely not just to catch him, there must be a deeper secret hidden in it. Intuition told him that this secret might be related to Lod. This, I can't tell you. Hyldra did not intend to continue speaking. He walked slowly towards Tony with his perfectly round legs. But you will soon know why we are doing all this. 1 or 2. They are looking down on me. His entire body was glowing with a terrifying red light. After the clothes on his chest were melted, 2 dragon-shaped tattoos were revealed. He, who had a narrow self-esteem, had been completely enraged by the indifference of these 2 people. The despair virus had caused the temperature on his body to almost reach over 2000 degrees that could melt steel. The high temperature caused the air around him to boil and evaporate like water. I am Aldrich Killian. I am destined to control the king of the world. How dare you look down on me? The killing intent in Killian's eyes boiled as he let out a hoarse roar, causing countless grains of sand to fall down from the roof. You are too noisy. There was a hint of displeasure in Hyldra's voice, and he raised his hand to condense the huge spiritual power into an arrow and shoot it out. Su! An azure light cut through Hollow's sky, and directly pierced through Killian. The huge impact of the arrow instantly tore open his chest. His skin, flesh, and bones were torn apart inch by inch, leaving behind a bowl-sized hole. After passing through several walls behind him, it slowly disappeared. Killian's eyes widened, and his eyes were filled with unwillingness and astonishment. It was as if he could not believe that his ambition that was about to be completed would end in such a ridiculous way. He did not expect that he would be so fragile that he could not even withstand a single arrow from that woman. Fresh blood spilled out from his chest, mixed with broken organs. There was a trace of regret on his face. If he had not provoked that woman, he might not have ended up like this. I don't accept it. Using his last bit of strength, Killian looked at Tony with jealousy and shouted, "Why? Everyone thinks highly of you. More handsome than you, smarter than you, more powerful than you, more money than you, more caring than you, more popular than you." Tony looked at him coldly, not feeling any pity in his heart. Is this enough? If it is not enough, I can say a few more. You motherfucker. Jillian opened his eyes wide and finally swallowed his last breath in his anger and resentment. The person in the way has been dealt with. Hyldra clapped his hands and turned to look at Tony. It's our turn now. Are you ready? Hehe, I've recovered a long time ago. Tony took a deep breath and grinned. I sincerely thank you for giving me so much time to prepare. It doesn't matter. Hyldra smiled and said, then let me see. You plan to escape from my hands. Tony shook his head and said seriously, you are wrong. I knew from the beginning that I would not be able to escape. So you intend to obediently follow me? Hyldra said. Of course not. Tony pulled out Zanpakuto from his waist and heavily exhaled. My choice is to defeat you, bring the world into my palm, and analyze the principles of all things. In my name, show yourself, Hephaestus. Rumble. The surging spiritual power torrent crashed into the surrounding space, and the surface of the ground was constantly torn apart by the violent tremors. Fiery pillars rose into the sky one after another, as if lava was flowing out from the depths of the Earth's core. They exploded with an astonishing energy that could destroy the heavens and the earth, instantly destroying all the laboratories under the villa. At the center of the pillar of flame that rose into the sky, a giant with muscles and bones slowly stood up. It waved a huge hammer in its hand and smashed it down. The howling wind squeezed the air and everything, and the fierce and unyielding power shook the earth. For a time, a visible shock wave was set off. Even with Hyldra's level, she was also pushed back dozens of meters. When she raised her head again, she saw Tony's whole body was covered with muscles, like a wild giant from the ancient times. Go to hell! Tony stepped on the raging flames that rolled up like waves. He raised the giant hammer that was several times larger than his size, and with a terrifying power that was like a landslide, he smashed down from above. The giant hammer was in the air, and the wind pressure exploded. The surrounding air waves were almost compressed into substance, and even the surface of the ground was collapsing under the impact. Not bad, you have a bit of strength. Hyldra calmly raised her hand towards the falling giant hammer. Bright red lines covered her slender and white arms. Her 5 slender fingers opened and she lightly spat out a few words, but unfortunately, if you want to kill me, this level is too far off, blood vein. Bang! The moment the giant hammer came into contact with his palm, it was as if metal had struck each other. Hyldra's body only sank slightly. His feet sank half an inch into the ground and he forcefully resisted the impact of the giant hammer. After that, no matter how hard Tony tried, he was unable to push it. It felt as if he had overestimated his own abilities and wanted to push down a mountain. Too weak. Hyldra shook her head. Her 5 fingers gripped the hammer tightly and her arm pulled hard to the side. A powerful force that could not be matched was transmitted into Tony's hand along the body of the hammer, and he was like a child facing an adult, unable to resist. He was suddenly flung to the side and slammed into the wall. This time, the impact was not light. Tony knocked down more than a dozen walls, plowing out a 100-meter-long ravine before he completely stopped. The scene in front of him was filled with blood red. More than 10 ribs in his chest were broken, and his internal organs seemed to be moving. All the cells in his body were screaming hysterically, and his limbs were unconscious. In just an instant, Tony knew that he could no longer move. That woman was just as she had said, her hands were very measured. She broke his limbs and left him a breath of air. Ta! 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 In his blurry vision, a tall figure was approaching. I told you not to resist long ago. Hyldra slowly squatted down and raised Tony's drooping head. Struggling and resisting will only increase your pain. You are wrong. Tony opened his bloodshot eyes and a smile appeared on his bloody mouth. From the very beginning, I never planned to defeat you. The reason why I used Shikai was because I had other plans. Oh! Hyldra propped up her chin with both hands and immediately became interested. Interesting. Then tell me, what other plans do you have? Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Tony smiled weakly and bitterly. I don't care about this plan. It is called turning myself in. Turn yourself in. Hyldra was even more confused. She asked, who are you going to turn yourself into? Could it be the police station in New York? No, to turn yourself into Soul Society. Tony said and took a few deep breaths. He raised his trembling hand and pointed to the back of Hyldra. A mortal who illegally stole Death God's power, plus Wandenreich's Quincy. Guess. Soul Society will send that captain. Hyaldra's pupils suddenly shrank, and she suddenly turned back to look behind him. Dash! An ancient, deep red arched door suddenly appeared amidst the dense, light blue spiritual energy. The black butterfly flapped its wings like a graceful dancer, nimbly dancing in the air. A tall, thin man with short silver hair narrowed his eyes. His hands were in his wide sleeves, and a fox-like smile hung on his face. He slowly walked out of the arched door. Good evening, both of you. Chapter 607, The Consequence. 3rd Division Captain, Ichimaru Jin. The plain white feathered garment, in contrast with the black dead clothes inside, the silver-haired man with a sly smile, 2 loose long sleeves hiding his hands, the white belt around his waist, with the short ribs as long as a forearm, sword. This man was obviously smiling, but gave people a feeling of extreme danger, like a cold and slippery snake, hiding in the grass and secretly peeping at prey. The Quincy of the Wandenreich. Ichimaru Jin's eyes narrowed into a line, and his dangerous eyes seemed to sweep past, smiling, "Are you going with me, or do you want me to break your limbs and take you away?" The same question, but the questioner was different. The two sides cleverly exchanged positions, but now the strong side of the position became Ichimaru Jin, the captain of the 3rd Division. Tony leaned against the ruins of the wall and looked at the dignified Quincy. Recalling the familiar scene before, he suddenly had a funny feeling in his heart. I don't know if the current Hyaldra is like him at that time, his heart is obviously aggrieved to death, but he still has to rack his brains to think of a way. Death God. Hyaldra's eyes under the mask showed a dignified meaning. Spiritual power climbed at a speed visible to the naked eye, surrounding her to form a storm. Oh! It seems that you are not going to follow me obediently. Ichimaru Jin raised his eyelids slightly, and his eyes were cold, revealing an extremely dangerous aura. The surroundings suddenly became heavy. The air was as thick as the water in the deep sea, rippling with ripples visible to the naked eye. The heavy pressure filled the entire plant. Tony suddenly felt difficult to breathe. Every breath he took needed to exert all his strength and use the power in his lungs. Is this Captain? Although he had witnessed the strength of the captain when the aliens invaded, he was very far away from the real battlefield at that time. Therefore, from his feeling alone, it was not very direct and clear. He just felt that the destructive power was very strong. But now, the distance between the two was less than 5 meters. In a situation where they were almost face to face, they were enveloped by the bottomless spiritual power. The terrifying momentum made his bones and muscles scream wildly, and he felt that he could be crushed at any time. At this moment, even moving his fingers and breathing air became an unattainable dream. His heart was firmly grasped in the hands of others. Every beat was like the last time. Life and death were completely out of his control. And the 3rd Division captain, from beginning to end, did not look at him, did not put him in his eyes at all. The reason was that he was too weak. Tony felt a little bitter in his heart. However, it was understandable. Death God, who was as weak as him, must be a big catch in Soul Society. One was a weak person who could be seen everywhere, the other was a high and mighty captain. Why would he care about his feelings? Finally, the momentum came to the peak. The two completely different spiritual power rushed at each other like a flood, setting off a huge wave of air that was visible to the naked eye. With a whistling sound, it was like an army of thousands of men and horses, trampling on the surrounding 100 meters of space. Without any movement from Hyaldra, a huge spirit bow was formed above it. The bowstring was pulled to the full moon, and there was a huge blue arrow on it. A large Divine Saint Destroyer arrow. Bang! As the bowstring that was pulled to the full moon loosened, the air bomb shook and caused a burst of waves, as if hundreds of tons of explosives were detonated in the ear, causing Tony's eardrums to hurt, and his chest seemed to have been hit by a hammer. The blue arrow instantly cut through Hollow's air, like a meteor falling from the sky, accompanied by the sound of tearing the sky. It directly shot towards Death God's face. Ichimarujin seemed to know that this move was powerful, but he did not choose to meet it head-on, but stepped on Hoho and quickly retreated. The arrow missed, although it did not hit the enemy, it also forced Ichimarujin back, and Hyldra did not want to continue to pester, so he suddenly turned around and reached out to grab Tony's shoulder. Her goal was to take Tony Stark, not to waste time with a captain. Akoros, Shinso. A voice came from the smoke, followed by a bright sword light. The speed was so fast that it was difficult to respond. Rushing with a fierce momentum, the goal was to destroy the heart of the Quincy. If she wanted to take Tony away, she was bound to be seriously injured by this sword. Without any hesitation, Hyldra directly pulled back her right hand, and at the same time, his right foot stepped to the side. The sharp sword light almost grazed her cheek, and dangerously swept past from the side. If her reaction had been slower by a fraction of a second, her heart would have been directly penetrated. Is the reaction of Quincy so fast? Ichimarujin walked out of the smoke with a smile, holding the short sword blade in his hand and said, "I thought I could save some strength, but I didn't expect you to avoid it. This makes me a little headache." Hyldra's white mask was cut open by sword's light. She raised her hand and touched it. Her eyes stared at him coldly and said, "I hate insidious guys like you. You always like to hide in the dark and sneak attack. You can't blame me for this." Ichimarujin narrowed his eyes and shrugged as if he was hurt. "After all, my Zanpakuto isn't as gorgeous as the others, and he doesn't have the ability to win with a single strike, so I can only use this kind of sinister method." While the two of them were confronting each other, Tony's gaze locked onto the short sword. His expression suddenly became a bit strange. He stared straight at the short sword as if he had seen something unbelievable. Akoros. Shinso? He had clearly heard what this Ichimarujin captain said. If the memory was right, Laud seemed to have used the same ability in the beginning, and even the sword was the same. But how was this possible? Every Zanpakuto who had his own name was a unique existence, just like it was impossible to exist in the world. Two identical fingerprints, Death God could not have the same Zanpakuto. And this scene, without a doubt, subverted all previous views. The same Zanpakuto, the same ability and attributes, were used by two different people. Was it Laud's problem, or this Ichimarujin problem? Tony was confused for a moment, and his mind was in a mess, but his intuition told him that the problem was with Laud. Clang dash! A crisp sound of sword's cry pulled Tony back to reality from his thoughts. The two boiling spiritual power rushed to the peak like a volcanic eruption. The two figures disappeared at the same time, followed by a burst of brilliant light. Sword and the azure arrow crossed over 100 times in an instant. At a speed that the naked eye could not capture, they fiercely collided in this factory room that was less than 100 square meters. Violent gales surged out like raging waves, and the sharp sword light even cut open the surrounding hollow, leaving behind countless fine and tiny cracks. This level of battle made Tony, who was watching from the side, feel bitter. The sharp and fierce wind that overflowed from the battlefield was so sharp that it could cut through gold and jade, not to mention a mortal like him. His flesh was cut open on the spot, and blood could not stop flowing out. If he stayed here any longer, he would probably be cut into pieces before he could make a move. Tony used the last of his strength to roll and crawl to a hole in the ground. He trembled as he looked at spiritual power who was rushing out. He thought to himself, "Laud, oh Laud, if you don't come, I will really die." Chapter 608, Exposed. On one side was Hyldra, one of the members of Star-Crossed Knights, codenamed E. On the other side was the most elite high-end combat power of Soul Society, the 3rd Division Captain of Godai 13th, Ichimarujin. The two almost represented the top level of each power at the current stage. Just from the current spiritual power, although Hyldra is slightly weaker than Ichimarujin, it is not without the strength to fight back. The unique Rishi control constitution of Quincy, as well as many styles and fighter skills, coupled with the power of the sacred text, actually gained the upper hand in a short time, and in turn suppressed Ichimaru Jin. Another collision, Hyldra raised his hand to make a pistol, and with the sound of boom in his mouth, a ball reishi flew out quickly. Ichimaru Jin had no time to dodge and had to raise his left hand to resist. However, at the moment of contact, the sleeve of his left hand was instantly blown into pieces. Boom! The destructive power and flames caused by the violent explosion caused Ichimaru Jin's originally intact left hand to be bloody. Seeing that, Sid raised his finger and pointed it at him again. Even though he was acting like a sinister viper, he could not help but change his face slightly and immediately retreated more than 10 meters away from him. Your reaction is quite fast. Hyldra did not choose to pursue. Instead, he quietly stood in place and said coldly, if you had been 1 second slower just now, you would have been blown into a pool of meat paste. So this is your ability. Ichimaru Jin's narrowed eyes slowly opened a little, and the light blue eyes were cold, and the corners of his lips smiled slightly. To condense your own spiritual power into a ball-shaped object and shoot it out, and then the object hit by spiritual power will become a blasting object, which is a very dangerous ability. After being exposed by the mystery of the ability, Hyldra did not show any surprise, but admitted openly, yes, this is the holy text bestowed by His Majesty. What a headache! Ichimaru Jin showed a distressed expression and was not affected by the injury on his left hand. He grinned and said, the order to release the restriction has not been issued. If I continue to waste time with you, maybe I will really die. Hyldra said faintly, it is not too late to escape now. I will not chase you, Death God. Oh, it is too early to say this now. Ichimaru Jin smiled and raised his hand to move Shinso in front of him. Sword pointed to the location of Quincy and said slowly, although spiritual power is limited, the solution can still be used. A naked, cold, and surging killing intent instantly enveloped Hyldra's entire body. God-killing spear. As Ichimaru Jin's flat voice fell, the short sword Shinso in his hand suddenly burst out an unparalleled light, even taking away the color of everything in the world. The whole world turned grey. Then, a ray of light that broke Dawn's unconsciousness suddenly cut through this deathly silent world. Whoosh! A clear and crisp sound cut through the silent night sky. The sight of Sword, who was like a ray of light, reflected the dim moonlight. With an astonishing speed, Sword broke through the dull air and shot straight ahead with a series of ear-piercing sonic booms. This sword did not have any fancy techniques. If there was something amazing about it, then it must be the speed of its expansion and contraction. Sword, who was glowing with brilliance, flashed a streak of light. His speed was so fast that even Hyldra did not have time to react. She could only subconsciously use Bloodvein to strengthen her physical defense. Then, Sword pierced through her right shoulder with irresistible force. The light of Sword, which contained sharp sword intent, swept past, plowing a gully several meters wide. Everything that passed by was cut apart by this sword light. Even the invisible and intangible air showed a visual effect of being cut off. Sword's light extended all the way to the end of the earth, and the howling storm uprooted the entire villa, setting off tons of soil and ruins that were thrown high into the sky. On the other hand, the terrifying people in the villa, the Ten-Ring Gang. Many of them were still sleeping in their dreams, and they didn't even know what had happened before turning into a large bloody mist. However, to some extent, they were also atoning for their sins. After all, compared to the innocent people who had been harmed by them, it was also a kind of happiness to die without any pain. What a fast speed of stretching! Jin's sword did not hit the vital point. Hyldra staggered up from the ruins and covered the wound on her left shoulder. Blood dripped down her smooth shoulder. The mask on her face was a little broken, vaguely revealing the lower half of her delicate jaw and facial feature. I was just careless just now. Next time, you won't hit me so easily. Hyldra turned her eyes to Ichimaru Jin. Spiritual power once again emerged from the surface of his body, like a violent tide that impacted the surrounding space. I'm sorry, Quincy. Ichimaru-jin squinted, with a dangerous smile on the corner of his lips, pulled open the shirt in front of his chest, revealing a black marigold mark. Just now, the command to lift my limit has been issued. Hydra's eyes suddenly shrank into needles. She knew the limitation of spiritual power. Any vice captain or above, death god, before entering the modern realm, would have to engrave their team's badge mark somewhere in his body, and limit his own spiritual power to an extreme limit, so as not to affect the souls of the modern realm. And spiritual power's limit was 80%. In other words, once Ichimaru-jin lifted spiritual power's limit, his physical strength would instantly soar to 5 times as much as before. This time, count yourselves lucky. Hydra knew how serious the problem was, so she didn't dare to stay any longer. The moment before she left, she took a deep look at Tony's position and disappeared into the shadows. Ichimaru-jin shook his head and chuckled, then he closed his clothes to block the mark. Tony carefully stuck his head out. When he found out that Hydra had really left, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. However, a cold and gloomy gaze drifted over, causing his heart to instantly jump to his throat. The true test had only just begun. But fortunately, he had already made preparations in advance for this worst situation. Among the large number of Soul Society, a weak death god like him could be said to be countless. He was even less valuable than the weeds on the outside. The other party was a high and mighty captain. How could he possibly know him? Therefore, he only needed to lie properly, and maybe he would have a chance to get away with it. Just as he was thinking about how to speak, he heard Ichimaru-jin chuckle and said, "Tony Stark, according to the order of Central 46, you are suspected of stealing Death God's power. Come back with me to Soul Society and accept the punishment. We've been exposed." As soon as this was said, it was as if a bolt from the blue had struck Tony in the head. How was this possible? He did not give any chance to quibble, nor did he have any thoughts of beating around the bush, directly breaking his last bit of fantasy. So much so that Tony's mind was completely blank. He had almost no idea at all, only one thought remaining. He was dead for sure. Chapter 609, You're late. Tony felt that his limbs were stiff and his whole body was cold, as if the winter was immersed in cold water. Ichimaru-jin slowly walked forward, leaned over, and showed a wicked smile. "You obviously hid so well, but I saw through you with a glance. Let me guess. Are you very puzzled now? How do I know?" Tony raised his head stiffly, and a figure flashed in his mind. His eyes were grey and he said bitterly, "Yes. Laud betrayed me." He could only think of this possibility. If not for Laud's betrayal, how could the ordinary death god in Soul Society know of his existence? It's a pity that I guessed wrong. Ichimaru-jin shook his head and looked at Tony with a smile and said slowly, "The reason why we can find you is not because of who betrayed you, but because we have been paying attention to you a long time ago." A long time ago? Tony's eyes trembled like an earthquake. "Well, let me think about it." Ichimaru-jin thought for a moment, and then said with a smile, "It was probably from the time when Laud contacted you that we began to include you as an observation target. It was only until recently that we confirmed it was you." Laud. It was Laud again? It seemed that the reason why everyone was looking for him was because he had been in contact with Laud. Whether it was the female Quincy or the captain in front of him, they seemed to be pursuing the people that Laud had been in contact with, and he, as one of the closest to Laud, naturally received close attention from these people. But the question came, what purpose did they have? The following questions seemed to be entangled in a furble. The messy thoughts made Tony completely confused. These people were so concerned about him that they even did not hesitate to lure him out of Laud's monitoring range. What did they want to do? "Why are you guys paying attention to me?" Tony's temple jumped, he endured the pain and asked with gritted teeth. "This question." Ichimaru-jin smiled like a fox and said, when you come back to Soul Society with us, you will naturally know. Wait. It has something to do with Lod, right? Tony wanted to try his best to stall for more time. He hurriedly raised his hand and said, in any case, I can't run away. Even if I return to Soul Society to be punished, you should at least let me die and understand, right? Although Ichimaru-jin saw through his mind, he did not break it. Instead, he had a playful expression and said, it seems that you are not too stupid. There is indeed a part of the reason with him. If you want to blame, you can only blame him for choosing you. Did he do something to me, so you all came to me? Tony's mind was very sharp, and he quickly analyzed some useful clues from Ichimaru-jin's words. Hehe, I don't know. Ichimaru-jin shook his head decisively, squinted his eyes and smiled, if you expose the mystery too early, the game will not be fun. Although the other side did not say anything, this kind of avoiding answer made Tony believe his guess. Sure enough, Lod had really done something to him. In his heart, he had always regarded Lod as a mentor and a friend. Until a few seconds ago, he could not believe this fact. But now, the moment he was really confirmed, an indescribable sense of disappointment suddenly enveloped his whole body. Lod betrayed him. That man was using him to plot some unspeakable secret. There is not much time left. We should go back to Soul Society. Ichimaru-jin smiled and patted him on the shoulder. He did not give any more opportunities to buy time. His ruthless words were like a hammer, ruthlessly smashing Tony's last hope. Wait. I still have one last wish. Tony's face was pale and bitter. Let me send those two away and then follow you to Soul Society, okay? Maya and Potsp were protected by Kido's barrier, so they were not affected by the aftermath. However, the two of them were still unconscious and it was easy for accidents to happen if they stayed here, so Tony wanted to send these two women away before he left. This was his last wish. No need. Ichimaru-jin raised his hand and the stronger Kido enchantment shrouded the two people. That troublesome guy will come soon, so we better leave quickly, I don't want to fight with him again. The troublesome guy? Tony was slightly stunned and immediately understood that he was referring to Lord Karl. Don't try to stall for time. Ichimaru-jin seemed to have predicted it and destroyed Tony's fantasy in advance, break your legs and then take you away. It is not difficult for me. I think you don't want to do this, right? Tony's face was stiff and he sighed helplessly, I'll go with you. I only beg you to let them go. Dash. The crisp sound of a bell rang, and light blue spiritual energy floated up. A dark red ancient arched door slowly appeared as if it was hollow. It was the realm entrance that led to Soul Society. Ichimaru-jin raised his hand and gently pressed it. The arched door immediately opened slowly to both sides, revealing the dark and deep passage inside. It made people feel inexplicable palpitations, as if not for the door to Soul Society, but the mouth of an abyss beast. Tony looked at the darkness inside the door, his mood was both excited and sad. He was excited that he could finally see the rumored Soul Society, and the sad thing was that this was probably the first time and the last time he saw Soul Society. Let's go. Ichimaru-jin took the lead and walked into the door, not caring whether the people behind him followed. Tony's footsteps were a little stiff. He wanted to take this opportunity to escape, but after thinking about it, he thought it was better to forget it. Since the other party dared to go in first, he was not afraid of him turning around and running away. Moreover, he had seen Shinso's speed. Tony admitted that his speed was not that fast. If he dared to turn around and escape, he would probably say goodbye to his two legs in the next second. Whew! Taking a deep breath, Tony gritted his teeth, stomped his feet, and strode into the door. But just as the door was about to close, a black figure suddenly appeared, and a hand blocked the door that was about to close. Creak! A hand pressed down forcefully on the door, and a familiar face appeared before their eyes. Lord! Tony widened his eyes, and a glimmer of hope ignited in his heart. Ryūjin. But when he wanted to ask for help from Lod, he found that he could not move at all. His body was like a puppet controlled by a puppet. He could only watch helplessly, but he could not make a sound. Tisk, 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 tisk. Ichimarujin tsked a few times and the smile on his face faded a little. Isn't this biggest traitor of Soul Society 100 years ago, Lord Karl, who caused hundreds of death gods' disappearance? Why mention the past? Lod looked at him expressionlessly. His gaze turned to Tony and his eyebrows inadvertently raised. This person is still useful to me. Can you not take him away first? Sorry, Lod. Ichimarujin shook his head and smiled to refuse. He is a criminal wanted by Central 46. I can't hand him over to you. Even Central 46. Shock flashed through Lod's eyes, but it was quickly concealed by him. He frowned and said, although stealing Death God's power is a serious crime, it is not necessary to let those old guys come out, right? Who knows what those old guys are thinking? Ichimarujin put on a helpless look and shrugged, but since it is the direct order from Central 46, even if it is our captain-level other existence, we must follow it. No. No. This sinister guy was lying. Tony suddenly realized that he and Lod had been cheated by Ichimarujin. This guy clearly knew that Lod would come and even said that Lod deliberately hid something, but now he deliberately pretended to be ignorant. Obviously, this Ichimarujin had a big problem. He wanted to remind Lod to be careful, but unfortunately, he could not do it at all and could only watch helplessly. You have changed a lot, Silver. Lod looked at him deeply and sighed as if he had given up. Everyone will change, won't they? Chapter 610, Free the Rich Guy. In the end, Lod sighed and chose to give in. Ichimarujin took Tony Stark in front of him. Dong! The heavy wooden door closed. The moment the realm gate slowly closed, Tony's heart was cold. He thought he saw the hope of being saved, but he didn't expect that the last thing to greet him was a deeper despair. He was like a puppet, following behind Ichimarujin without any awareness. He didn't even observe the surrounding environment. He just walked for an unknown period of time, and finally welcomed a dazzling light. Here we are. Ichimarujin's unique voice instantly pulled him back to reality from the chaos. The moment Tony stepped out of the door, he felt as if he was immersed in a warm ocean. He could feel a large amount of rich reishi rushing into his body, and all the cells in his body were greedily swallowing it. After getting used to the dazzling sunlight, Tony slowly opened his eyes. The scene that came into view shocked him. His facial muscles trembled uncontrollably, and his pupils gradually expanded. The blue sky was decorated with thin white clouds. In the gentle and warm wind, there was a refreshing air, mixed with the unique fragrance of plants. It was a wonderful feeling that had not been experienced in a long time. If nature brought about the charm of harmony, then the white buildings in front of them, the rigorous and ancient architectural style, and the flying eaves and roof tiles, which made Tony deeply shocked. The white buildings formed from their feet and spread far away. It was impossible to see where the edges of these buildings were. White square stone bricks covered the earth, and the eyes followed the wide main road in front of them that could accommodate hundreds of people side by side, extending to the end, and one could see a huge white palace built on a mountain. On the main road leading to the White Palace, there were white buildings on both sides of the road, and there were 12 huge black flags on the relatively prominent garret buildings at every distance. On each black flag, there were words with white background gold painted on it, and there were 12 different kinds of flowers, and numbers written from 2nd to 13th, which were the same style as the back of Captain's Hayori. There was no doubt that under those black flags, it was the encampment of the 13th Division Guardian Division. This is Soul Society. Tony had never imagined that a soul living in hell would be so clean and tidy. It even gave people the illusion that this was not the so-called hell, but heaven. There were people entering and exiting from time to time in front of the door, and there were also people who came and went. They were all dressed in the same style of Black Death Tyrant clothes, and ZANPAKUTOU, who had not yet been released, was on each side of their waists. "Hello, Captain Ichimaru-jin." Several death gods saw Ichimaru-jin and immediately stopped and said, "Welcome back safely, do you want to go to 4th Division to heal?" "Not for the time being." Ichimaru-jin smiled and waved his hand and said, "This is the criminal appointed by Central 46. I will send him to Penitence Tower first." "The criminal appointed by Central 46? Many death god heard this and their faces showed horror, as if they were staring at a rare thing. Tony panicked for no reason. He swallowed his saliva and asked in a low voice, "Is that Central 46 room very powerful?" Ichimaru-jin put his hand on his lips, pondered for a moment and said, "The order of the Central 46 room is a law that must be followed by any death god. Can you understand what I said?" "Understood." "Isn't that the president?" Tony felt sad, but he also understood why Lod chose to give up after hearing this. This time, he was really dead for sure. Hield, the sky shuttle carrier. After learning the lesson from before, they were suspended in the sky above the Pacific Ocean. It was already late at night. Having just finished dealing with a pile of documents, Fear rubbed his sore temples and leaned back against the chair. He closed his eyes, intending to relax and take a nap. But before he could rest for 2 minutes, the door was suddenly pushed open. Bang! The sound of the door opening dispelled Fury's sleepiness. Although he was already exhausted, Agent's habits all year round still woke him up immediately. "Director, it's bad." Natasha's expression was extremely solemn, and there was a trace of panic between her brows. The moment she opened her mouth, she was shocked. Just now, Tony Stark was captured by a captain of Soul Society in Tennessee. "What did you say?" The last trace of sleepiness in Fury's mind was dispelled by Natasha's words. He jumped up from his seat and moved his face closer to her. He stared at her with one eye. "Agent Romanoff, today is not April Fool's. Are you sure you are not joking with me?" "Director, I am not joking." Natasha was expressionless. Looking at the black face that was only a few centimeters away from her, she took a step back and cleared her throat. "The information came from Lord Carl. He told us that Tony Stark was forcefully taken away by a captain of Soul Society." Information from Lord Carl. That basically meant that the source of this information was conclusive. After all, there was no need for that man to lie to them. Fury sat down on the chair and crossed his hands against his lower jaw. He fell into deep thought and muttered, "But why did he tell us this news? I have an idea. It might not be accurate." Natasha hesitated for a moment and said, "I think the reason he told us is probably because he wants us to save Tony." "Continue," said Fury. "Actually, the reason is very simple." Natasha said, "If he doesn't want to intervene, he can be like before. It's fine as long as he doesn't ask. There's no need to specially inform us about Tony being taken away by Soul Society." "That makes sense." Fury approved of her speculation. He tapped the table with one hand and rubbed his chin with the other. He said, "But even if it is as you said, with our current strength, what qualifications do we have to save Tony?" "That will depend on Lod." Natasha raised a strand of hair and smiled. "Since he doesn't want to have a direct conflict with Soul Society, if he wants to use our hands to save Tony, he has to pay a price, right?" "You mean?" Fury understood what she was thinking and suddenly realized that this was a rare opportunity. On the surface, this was only a rescue operation, but if one pondered deeper, they could find more benefits. On one hand, they could take advantage of this opportunity to send people to explore Soul Society and deepen their understanding of Death God as well as the information about that ancient organization. On the other hand, they could use this as an excuse to ask for some compensation from Lod and deepen the cooperation between the two. The only price they had to pay was that after the plan failed, they might suffer Soul Society's revenge. However, compared to what they had obtained, this so-called risk was not worth mentioning. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. No matter how careful and cautious Anglo was, the blood and face of the Anglo-Saxon people always flowed with the desire to take risks and greed. In particular, the United States of America had immersed it into its own instinct, and it was a mark that could never be erased. Contact Frank and Rogers. Chapter 611, Discussion. HIELD, Sky Space Carrier. It had been 24 hours since Tony was taken away by Soul Society. The members of the Avengers scattered all over the world had also received Fury's emergency summons. This was their agreement with Fury. Normally, SHIELD would not disturb the Avenger. He would even take the initiative to help them hide their whereabouts or deal with some troublesome matters. He would give the Avenger members a certain degree of freedom. However, the price corresponding to this was that once the Avenger members received an emergency call, no matter where they were or what they were doing, they had to unconditionally respond. Bruce Banner, Hawkeye Barton, Black Widow Romanoff, Steve Rogers, Spider-Man Peter Parker, and the Punisher Frank Castle, the 6 people above were all sent to this space carrier by SHIELD's private plane. The place used to receive the Avenger members was a secret conference room that was specially built. There were strong soundproof materials on all 4 sides, and their resistance to attacks was also quite excellent. The conference room was about 100 square meters. A huge round table was placed in the middle, and 9 seats that fit the curves of the human body were surrounded in turn. Behind them were the marks of the respective Avenger. As the 6 people gradually sat down, the others looked at Peter strangely. Among them, only Peter looked a little miserable. His whole body was wrapped in bandages, only his nose, eyes, and mouth were exposed. He was like a mummy that had just crawled out of the grave. At this moment, Peter was sitting in a chair, looking around uneasily, as if he was looking for someone. There was also Thunder God Thor. Although he was also one of the members of the Avenger, it was a pity that he was in Asgard, and the Earth signal could not be transmitted, so he did not come to this gathering. After everyone had gathered, Fury pushed open the door and walked in, sitting in the chair at a leisurely pace. Fury crossed his hands in front of him and leaned back slightly on the back of the chair. His gaze swept past everyone's faces one by one, and then he slowly said, "This time, we have a very important matter. We need everyone to discuss whether it is worth it to vote." They were not surprised that there was a very important thing to do. However, it was a little surprising that everyone had to participate and discuss whether this matter was worth it. Due to the incident with the space gemstone last time, Steve frowned and thought that it was Fury who wanted to court death again, so his tone was a little rushed and directly interrupted him. "Have you not learned your lesson from last time? Do you want to repeat the tragedy in New York?" "No, it's different this time." Fury shook his head and said, "I understand how you feel, Captain Rogers," he said, "but this matter has nothing to do with me. I hope you can patiently listen to me. Is that okay?" Steve realized that he had made a wrong judgment. Perhaps things were not as he had thought. He gave Fury an apologetic look. "Sorry, I was too anxious. Please continue." Fury was not angry. He maintained his calm tone and said slowly, "This is what happened. Yesterday, Tony Stark was arrested as a criminal by a captain of Death God. He was taken to Soul Society and was ready to be convicted." "Was he taken to Soul Society by a captain? What is Soul Society? What crime did he commit?" When the people present heard this, they all had different reactions. Natasha and Barton were informed of the news in advance, so they were very calm. On the other hand, Frank, Steve, and Peter were not so calm after hearing the news. As for Dr. Banner's question, it was temporarily ignored by everyone. "Wait, we are in a bit of a mess." Steve raised his hand to signal everyone to stop talking. After clearing up their thoughts, he asked, "Can you tell us what crime that guy has committed to make Seoul society send a captain to personally come to the modern world to arrest him?" As the leader of the team recognized by the Avengers, the words of Steve Rogers carried a lot of weight. The rest of them forced down their doubts and focused their eyes on the black brine egg, waiting for his answer. In the battle in New York, everyone had personally witnessed the strength of the captain. It was definitely an exaggeration to say that it could destroy the world, but it was not an exaggeration to say that it could destroy the city and destroy the country. They did not think that with Tony's little skill, he could make a captain-level death god personally come to the modern world to arrest him, unless he had caused a terrible disaster. "Frank, you should know the reason why we arrested him, right?" Fury propped up his chin with both hands and changed the topic to Death God and Frank, who were the only ones who had been acknowledged by Seoul society. "As for the reason, I have more or less guessed it." Seeing that everyone was looking at him doubtfully, Frank did not have any intention of avoiding or hiding it. He nodded slightly and said, "In Seoul society, there is a law that prohibits mortals from obtaining and using Death God's power through special means. The violators will be severely punished. Although I don't know the specific situation, the way Tony Stark gets Death God's power is not very orthodox. But according to normal circumstances, a criminal of his level should be dealt with by the chief officer Death God first. In the end, there is no other way, so we should send the Captain Death God to interfere." After Frank gave a brief introduction, everyone basically understood. Peter shrank his neck and muttered in a low voice, "Why does it sound like Mr. Stark is a stowaway? He should have been under the control of the Immigration Bureau, but unfortunately, he met someone from the FBI." It had to be said that although this analogy was a bit flawed, it was not bad at all. Natasha pursed her sexy red lips and smiled. "Peter is right. This is roughly what happened." "That's right, he has at least made me understand what you are talking about." The usually simple and honest Dr. Banner could not help but laugh. The serious atmosphere in the conference room was slightly diluted. Fear waited for everyone to calm down again. He gently knocked on the steel grinding conference table and said in a low voice, "You already know the general situation. Let us get to the point." The above news about Tony Stark being arrested was all provided by Lord Carl. It must not be difficult for everyone to guess that he deliberately leaked this information to us. On the surface, he wanted to use us to rescue Tony Stark, but we are not sure if there is a deeper purpose. So, let's vote. There was a touch of mystery in the depths of Fury's eyes, which swept through everyone's faces one by one and said in a deep voice, "As a member of the Avengers, you have the right to choose whether you want to save Tony Stark, one of the other members of the League." "I want to go." The moment his voice fell, Peter raised his hand, and his eyes under the bandage were unusually determined. "Mr. Stark saved me twice. No matter what he was caught for, I have to save him. This is the principle that I taught me." Fury looked at the others and added silently, "Let me make it clear in advance. Even if you choose not to save them, no one will blame you. After all, this is his own fault and he has to face such a powerful enemy. I will not force everyone." Natasha and Barton raised their hands. They belonged to SHIELD and would naturally participate in this mission. The only people left were Frank, Steve, and Bernard. "You say you won't force me, but every word is hinting that you are really something, Fury." Frank looked at the black soy egg speechlessly and raised his hand. "I don't have the habit of abandoning my comrades, and I am the only Death God. I have to go from any angle." Steve crossed his arms and leaned against the chair. "Like him, I will not abandon any comrades. Whether he is a playboy or Iron Man, we have fought side by side in New York, so I will definitely save him." Now, there was only one person left. Everyone's eyes were focused on Banner, waiting for the Hulk's answer. "I agree to save Tony." Chapter 612, The protagonists are here. The plan to rescue Tony was officially finalized by the Avenger. Peter, who was wrapped in bandages, weakly raised a question. Apart from Frank, who was Death God, none of them had the ability to move alone with their souls. How could they go to the legendary Soul Society who could only reach with their souls? Moreover, even Frank, who was Death God, had never been to Soul Society so far. Natasha thought about this for a moment and tried to come up with an idea. Actually, everyone doesn't need to worry too much about this problem. Since Lod wants to use us to save Tony, he can definitely solve the problem here. Since the method to enter has been temporarily solved, the rest of the problem is intelligence. Steve nodded slightly and then asked another fatal question: we can't rush in so blankly. We must get some general information about Soul Society. The three people from the military regiment and agent agreed with Steve's suggestion. Frank nodded and said, "That's right. If we don't have any information, we can only break into Soul Society directly. It will only make the success rate of the plan lower. Not only will we not be able to save Tony, but we will also be implicated." Natasha said, "You can also ask Lod about information. He probably won't hide it." Fury looked around and asked, "Do you have any other questions? Let's ask them together." Barton hesitated for a while and said, "Director, I think that with our strength, it is not enough to fight against Soul Society. We must have strong reinforcements. Otherwise, even if we plan carefully, in the face of absolute strength, it is just an egg against a stone." The moment this was said, everyone fell silent. This was a sharp question that they could not avoid, and it was also a dilemma that they had to face. Was the Avengers strong? Very strong, at least on Earth, they could be considered to be in the top. However, in front of the Captain Death God who easily destroyed the city and destroyed the country, they were as weak as newborn chickens. If they had to speak, perhaps only Frank and Banner could barely exchange a few moves with the captain. Others would die if they went over, and it was a meaningless death. When spiritual power erupted, ordinary people fell like wheat. No matter if you were an urban soldier or the top agent, under the captain's spiritual power, you were no different from ordinary people. Didn't we have reinforcements a long time ago? Seeing the dark clouds on everyone's faces, the atmosphere in the conference room was extremely heavy, but Fury laughed out of the blue, and his tone was a little relaxed. He said, "It's normal to have a big gap, but that doesn't mean we don't have a chance." Steve and the others had puzzled expressions. They did not understand what Fury was up to. "Lord Carl is our reinforcements." Fury showed a meaningful look and said, "We are just a sword. The one who really controls sword is Lord. With his personality, he can hint that we are going to save Tony. That means Tony must be very important to him." Natasha was the first to react. Her beautiful eyes widened. "He wants us to disrupt Soul Society's attention and then secretly rescue Tony." Steve frowned. "But in this way, even if we can save Tony, we will be trapped again, right?" Fury sighed and nodded. "This is the risk of the plan. If they really followed this plan, then it was very likely that another situation would occur in the end. That was, after Lod took advantage of them disturbing Soul Society and secretly rescued Tony Stark, he would treat them as abandoned children. When the time came, they would lose support, and they would be completely trapped in Soul Society." And this was the meaning that was revealed in Fury's words. I have something to say." Just as everyone was weighing the price, Peter raised his hand weakly and said, "In the past, this uncle told me a truth. The more you think about it, the more you will lose. It's better to not think about anything. Let's do it first." Frank's eyes lit up and he looked at Peter with a hint of appreciation. "The more gains and losses we consider, the more things we fear. No matter what the final result is, we have to rescue Tony, right?" "You are right. The more hesitant we are, the more opportunities we will miss." Steve slowly got up and swept his gaze across the crowd. He said in a low voice, "Since we are determined to save Tony, let's put aside the issue of retreat for now and focus on how to save him. An excellent team would inevitably have an excellent leader. And the influence and charm of a leader would stabilize the entire team members at any time, allowing them to condense into a rope and burst out with amazing strength. Under the influence of his magnetic voice, Barton put down the idea and smiled. I am willing to serve you, Captain. Since we've decided, let's go find Laud. Fury crossed his arms and said in a deep voice, if nothing goes wrong, he should be waiting for you. New York, Queens. The crowd within a few kilometers of the Spirit Cleansing Pavilion had been dispersed by SHIELD for various reasons. An advanced carrier aircraft with 6 Avengers. When the 6 of them came down from the carrier aircraft, they found a fat, black-haired girl dressed in a black, dead tyrant suit, standing in front of the door of the Pure Spirit Pavilion with a long sword at her waist. She seemed to have expected them to come, and deliberately waited here for them. Nemu. The people who were familiar with Laud's information recognized this girl at a glance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nemu nodded his fingers several times, then imitated the appearance of an adult, crossed his arms and nodded, not bad. There are 3 more people than my brother expected. Although 2 of them seem to be just to make up the numbers, forget it. Natasha and Barton were a little embarrassed, because they were just here to make up the numbers. Long time no see, Nemu. Frank's unchanging ice face actually revealed a smile at this moment, and even pulled out a one-man tall Mickey toy like magic. Here, this is a gift I brought for you when I went to Orlando. Do you like it? Peter stole a glance and immediately shouted. Before, when he went to Disneyland with Ned and Michelle on a break day, he saw this Mickey doll. The display cabinet was priced at $5,000, and it was also limited to sale. One had to know that $5,000 was enough to buy a good car. Natasha and Barton naturally knew, and they immediately cast a strange look. They did not expect Frank to like children. Wow! Thank you. Nemu happily took the doll and rubbed it. The next time I make you jigai, I won't steal from you. The corners of Frank's mouth twitched and he was speechless for a long time. The few of you, come with me. Big Brother has been waiting for you for a long time. Nemu was unwilling to leave the doll, so she turned around and walked into the Spirit Cleansing Pavilion first. Let's go. Frank indicated that there was no problem and took the lead to walk in. When the others saw this, they also followed. When they came to the basement, everyone except Frank had shock written all over their faces. God! What a big basement! Peter opened his mouth wide. Looked at the endless yellow plain. The shock in his heart could not be calmed for a long time. Frank was looking for Laud with his eyes, but he unexpectedly found another annoying person. The person happened to look over. When the 2 people saw each other, they instantly burst out swearing. Frank? Constantine? F***ck, why are you here? Thank you, thank you. You shameless bitch. You almost tricked me to death last time. Chapter 613, Targeted Training. One was embarrassed, the other was angry. The others were confused and did not understand the reason why Frank was angry. When did you 2 get to know each other? It was unknown when Laud had appeared. He was still wearing a home-style apron and there was a look of surprise on his face. I would rather not know him. The anger on Frank's face had not subsided. He gritted his teeth and glared at Constantine. When I went to carry out the mission, I met this bastard once. In the end, I was almost killed by him. He could roughly guess the reason. If nothing went wrong, Frank must have been deceived by Constantine, and the consequences must be very miserable. Otherwise, he would not have almost pulled out ZANPAKUTOU when they met again. Constantine smiled awkwardly and turned his head, not daring to look at Frank's angry eyes. He was indeed in the wrong. Speaking of which, it had been more than half a year. Before, when he was on his way to Newcastle, he accidentally broke into a casino where a group of demons gathered. It was said that this place was opened by a big shot from hell, and he was itching to investigate the news, so he went up to gamble a few times. Unexpectedly, he almost lost his underwear. But who was he, Constantine? He was famous for eating, drinking, gambling, cheating, and stealing, so it was naturally impossible for him to pay if he lost. Thus, he found an opportunity to escape from the casino, but he did not expect to be tracked by a group of demons. On the way, he coincidentally bumped into Frank, who was on a mission. In order to get rid of the group of demons, he told a small lie. Frank was tricked and deceived. He went to confront the group of demons. If he hadn't slipped away quickly and almost got beaten to death, the grudge of the two people would have been born at that time. So much so that when Frank saw Constantine now, he wanted to kill this bastard sword. After understanding what had happened, everyone looked at Winston with a hint of vigilance and distance from me. They instantly distanced themselves from this swindler in order to avoid being inexplicably killed. Don't be so nervous. In fact, I am a good person. I rarely betray my teammates. Constantine wanted to argue for himself. After all, the place he was going to was very dangerous. If he did not have a few teammates, he would not be at ease. Even Lucifer did not believe him when he said this. Constantine, who had a nose full of dust, could only retreat to the side resentfully and squat alone on the ground to draw circles. However, after the two of them interrupted, the other people's originally heavy mood suddenly became much more relaxed. At least the atmosphere was no longer as dignified as before, as if they were about to die. Since everyone is here, let's get ready to start. Laud was wearing a home-style apron, giving people a very strange feeling. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Everyone was attracted by the sound of fingers. Then, they felt the ground shake violently. 4 white stone pillars covered in cracks suddenly formed a square void gate. It suddenly rose from the shaking ground in front of them. Let me formally introduce you. Laud leaned slightly to the side so that everyone could see the stone door more directly. This is the Senkaimon that leads to Soul Society. It is usually a spirit particle converter above the cross-section door, combined with a fixed passage. Spirit particle converter. This was the first time Frank heard this term, and he was a little puzzled. That's right. Laud nodded slightly and said, as you know, Soul Society is a world that only souls can go to. If you want to go in, you must become a soul. But the only people who can move with their souls are Frank and Constantine, who are death god. The rest of them calmed down and waited for the next words. After a short pause, Laud continued, so if you want other people to go in, you must use the Ryūjin converter to convert your souls into Ryūjin and send them to Soul Society. In other words, there is no need to let the soul leave the body. I more or less understand. Steve quickly understood the principle. He looked at the white stone door and said, shall we set off now? But Laud deliberately lengthened his tone. After sweeping his eyes over the crowd, the smile on his face gradually disappeared and turned serious. This gate is not the real one, so the time to go straight to Soul Society is limited. There is only 5 minutes in total. 5 minutes. It was equivalent to a cigarette time, which made everyone present change their expressions slightly. Mr. Laud, is 5 minutes enough for us to reach Soul Society? Natasha, who was in a group of 2, felt a little uneasy. She and Barton were ordinary people, and could not compare with the speed of others. It's usually impossible. Laud shook his head and shrugged helplessly. It was originally impossible, so even if I tried my best to maintain the passage, I could only hold on for 5 minutes. Once you don't go out at this time, the door will be closed forever. Once the gate is closed, you will be trapped in the gap between the modern world and Soul Society for a long time. In the dangerous tunnel that is full of time vortex, even Death God will be lost in the space-time turbulence, and maybe a few hundred years will pass in an instant. Hiss! Hearing this, everyone's expressions changed in unison. They had not expected that just a passageway would be so dangerous. So. Laud paused and looked at the crowd. If you don't want to die, you have to go all out. The two-man team looked even worse. They felt that the mission had not yet begun, and it might be over. Steve thought for a moment, looked up at Laud, and asked, Mr. Laud, I want to know if you will help us more when we go to save Tony. If you want me to make a move, I advise you not to have any expectations. Laud shook his head and revealed a bitter expression. This matter must be done by you. I absolutely cannot step into Soul Society without permission. Otherwise, it will attract even greater danger. Even though they had already guessed that it was impossible, when they heard it, they could not help but feel disappointed. Without Laud's help, if they wanted to save Tony, it would be as difficult as challenging America and Germany in World War II, and it might even be more difficult than this. But if we only rely on the few of us, forget about rescuing Tony, the chances of passing through this door are not high. Steve's eyebrows were knitted into a ball as he spoke out his worries on behalf of his team members. I thought of this a long time ago. Laud said, I thought I had to avoid everyone. I was wiped out the moment I entered Soul Society. I specially prepared a targeted special training for 7 days to ensure immediate results. The effect is quickly visible. 7 days. A targeted special training. Everyone looked at each other, as if they had not expected this to be their aid. Steve looked a little hesitant and asked, Mr. Laud, let's not talk about how much strength the special training can improve. Isn't 7 days too long? Don't tell me that Mr. Stark has been sentenced before we finish our special training. Peter muttered in a low voice. Don't worry. Laud chuckled. Although the order from the Central 46 is absolute, the time required for the trial will take at least 15 days. I even left you 8 days. Special training. Steve's eyes lit up, and he suddenly felt a little expectant. I wonder how strong Laud's special training can strengthen his giant right arm. Chapter 614, Intense Chase. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. The targeted special training had finally ended, and at the same time, everyone had undergone a complete transformation. The first was Frank and Constantine, and the two of them, spiritual power, was almost close to level 4, and even touched the threshold of Bankai. The second was Steve, who had complete realism, from the initial incomplete form to the right arm of the giant, and the destructive power released by spiritual power when he accumulated power, even a little higher than the two Death God. In the course of the special training, Laud found something interesting. In the body of Spider-Man Peter Parker, there was actually a great hollow spiritual power that was hard to detect. Its strength was equivalent to the Aaronkar level. From spiritual power's traces and feeling, it could be determined that this was the power left by Gwen. There were other Aaronkar level spiritual power in his body, which actually contributed to Peter's full bring. However, the full bring was still in the brewing stage, and he had not found the item he loved deeply, so he could not place his soul in it. Therefore, he could only temporarily channel some spiritual power and pour it into his hands and feet to fight. As for the last two people group, Laud did not make it too difficult for them. Through the Ghost Soul experiment technology that Kisuke Urahara reappeared, a large number of mutant spirit particles were integrated into the bodies of the two people, so that they had the appearance of human beings, hundreds of years of life, and part of Death God's soul hunting clan. However, all of this had to be built on the price of sucking human souls as the foundation. In order to seek stronger power, Natasha and Barton naturally agreed to Laud's proposal. As for the human souls needed to be consumed to become stronger, there were many people in the US prison who were certain to die. He believed that Fury would not refuse. He would use the lives of a group of death row prisoners to exchange for two powerful forces. Maybe he would even applaud and cheer. After preparing everything, Steve was not in a hurry to let everyone set off. Instead, he chose to rest in place for a night to relieve the pressure of the special training. The next day, after a night of rest, everyone was in good spirits and gathered in front of the white stone door, ready to set off for Seoul Society. "Mr. Lod, we are ready. We can set off at any time." Steve changed into the Star Flag battlesuit and wore a golden round shield in his right hand. His standing posture was like a sharp sword, exuding the aura of a soldier. Frank and Constantine had also separated their souls from their bodies and turned into Death God, who was quietly waiting at the side, holding ZANPAKUTOU by his waist. "Before we officially depart, let me introduce you." Lod put a hand on Nemu's shoulder and said to everyone, "In this rescue operation, Nemu will go with you to Seoul Society. It is one of the few places I can help you." Peter seemed to be a little surprised. "Wait. It's too dangerous for such a young child to go with us, isn't it?" "Dangerous?" Hearing this, Lod was stunned for a few seconds, and then he looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You don't think that Nemu is really just a child, do you?" Isn't that so?" Peter looked at Nemu, who was still licking his ice cream. The corner of his mouth could not help but twitch. "If we encounter danger, we can't take care of a child." Nemu put down the ice cream in her hand, and her big bright eyes locked on Peter. A powerful spiritual power burst out from her body and instantly enveloped everyone present. The vast and mighty spiritual power was like a flood, filling up all the corners of the space. Everyone felt that it was extremely difficult to breathe. It was as if there were several mountains pressing down on their bodies. Even the originally invisible and intangible air seemed to become sticky at this moment. "A child." There was a trace of mockery in the depths of Nemu's eyes. She used Ho-Ho to directly appeared in front of Peter, raised a chubby right hand, and gently flicked between his eyebrows. "Pa!" Peter was immediately sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into a mound 100 meters away. Although Nemu is very small, she is actually 100 years old. Lod walked over and touched Nemu. He turned to the stunned crowd and slowly said, "And this child is the original vice-captain of the 12th Division. With her taking you, it will be a lot safer along the way." "Vice-captain?" The other people looked at Nemu with a trace of respect in their eyes. It turned out that this seemingly cute little guy was actually more powerful than everyone present. Only Frank was entangled in 100 years old, and his face was extremely ugly, as if he swallowed a few flies. It turned out that Nemu, who was self-righteous child, was more than enough to be his grandmother. After finishing the last bite of the ice cream, Nemu licked her lips. Then, she looked at the crowd with her hands on her hips and said with a hint of milk in her voice, "All of you, listen up. There are only 5 minutes left, so you have to use all your strength. Other than running forward, don't think about anything else in your mind." Understood." Everyone replied with a strange expression. Seeing that everyone was ready, Lod was too lazy to continue wasting time. He directly walked to the edge of the white stone door, pulled ZANPAKUTOU out, and inserted him into the ground. "The moment the door opens, do not hesitate to rush in." After giving one last warning, Lod transferred his spiritual energy into the stone door. As the Ryūjin converter worked, the originally unremarkable white stone door suddenly burst out with dazzling white light. A thin layer of liquid covered the surface of the stone door and rippled slightly. The light was like a clear lake. "The door is open." As soon as Lod's voice fell, 7 figures passed by in succession and directly entered the dazzling light of the stone door. Danga. The dark path that could not be seen to the end was made up of dark purple matter that was close to the mud. Rotten corpses and bones could be seen everywhere, and the walls on both sides seemed to be moving slowly like living things. This was the crack between the modern world and Seoul society, and those dark purple matter were the restraint, which could devour all spirits and souls. Anything that it caught would be thrown into the dimensional turbulence, which could be said to be a very dangerous supernatural matter. Although it was the first time they had seen it, Laud had already told them about the knowledge of salvager before they came in. Therefore, everyone was very clear that the dark purple mud was so terrible that no one dared to touch it. Hurry up and catch up. Nimue tiptoed lightly, like a gust of wind, reminding others not to fall behind. Time was pressing, and there were only 5 minutes. The others immediately put away their curiosity, followed behind Nimue, and sprinted forward at full speed. As time passed, about 4 minutes passed, and when Soul Society was only 1 step away, they could see a white door of light. Barton, who was at the back of the team, suddenly discovered to his surprise that the walls formed by the streams on both sides seemed to be narrowing to the middle. Before he could tell this news to the few people at the front of the team, a bright orange light instantly lit up the entire danga from behind. At the same time, with a loud roar of the kotosu, it was like a high-speed train was approaching them from the back. Oh no, it's a sudden arrest. Nimue, who was at the front of the group, turned his head and his expression suddenly changed. He said in shock, "The scavenger of the danga is here. Everyone, run forward quickly. Don't be caught by it, or you will be devoured." The next moment, from the closed dark purple wall, there was a giant, fleshy object. The orange-yellow light beam was shot from the round hole at the top of the piece of meat. The kotatsu was like a bulldozer. Along with the rumbling sound, it was approaching them quickly. Everything that passed by was mercilessly swallowed by it. Everyone's expression changed instantly. They knew that if they were caught by this thing, they might be thrown into some space-time turbulence. At that time, if their luck was bad, it was not impossible for them to die directly. Under the threat of death, almost everyone used all their strength, wishing to have 2 more legs, and ran out of the exit like crazy. The so-called 8 immortals crossing the sea each showed their abilities, and this was the time to test them. But fortunately, it was a good thing. Laud's conscience had not yet disappeared. He only planned to let them experience the intense and exciting escape project, so he was very strict with the control of time and distance. Chapter 615, Rukanga. Buzz. A door of light suddenly appeared in the blue sky like a seal. Following that, 8 streams of white light shot out from the door of light. They streaked across the sky like meteors. After smashing through several houses, they landed on a flat street. Immediately, a huge cloud of dust rose. 8 figures slowly stood up from the dust and walked out in a sorry state. There was a trace of fear on everyone's faces, and their spirits were no longer as confident as before. The distance just now was only a few dozen meters, but in terms of danger and difficulty, it might not be inferior to a confrontation of life and death. When they first entered Soul Society, they were immediately put on a show of strength. Although this might not have been the will of those death god, it had indeed caused everyone to feel heavy pressure. Just a single path that led to Soul Society had almost wiped out the few of them, and they could not imagine what kind of terrifying danger they would encounter in the future. Everyone had a deep understanding of something. The difficulty of rescuing Tony was probably several times more difficult than they had imagined. "Is everyone all right?" Steve took a deep breath and rubbed his aching legs. He looked back at the number of people in the team and found that there were basically no problems with them. It was just that the exhaustion of their physical strength was relatively serious. Although the soul hunting constitution was strong, the prerequisite was that they needed to absorb souls. Natasha and Barton had no time to do this at all, so they were still much weaker than the others at the moment. They were the most dangerous on the way just now. They were also the 2 closest to the prison, so the consumption of willpower and physical strength was extremely serious. Fawebno M. In comparison, Frank and Constantine were much more relaxed. They relied on Ho-Ho that they had learned when becoming Death God, to escape without much effort. Peter, the youngest, opened his mask and let out a long breath of hot air from his mouth. He said with lingering fear, "It was really dangerous just now. I almost got caught. I thought I was dead for sure. Yes. Yes. I almost got caught." Natasha leaned on her knees and gasped for breath. Her red hair and face were wet with sweat. She looked like she had just come out of a bath, exuding a mature and attractive charm. Barton sat on the ground and said bitterly, "If we had been a second slower, Nat and I would have been caught." Dr. Banner smiled bitterly and did not speak. He had almost transformed just now. Seeing that everyone was safe and sound, Steve was relieved and turned to look around. There was no one on the slightly empty street. On both sides were man-made wooden houses. There were all kinds of signs hanging outside, and almost all of the existing languages could be seen on them, but most of them were in English. Is this Soul Society? Natasha looked at the signs and felt a strange sense of incongruity. It was clearly an ancient building structure, but it used all kinds of modern advertising words. For example, a certain hamburger shop, a certain fast food shop, and even some of them were clearly special signs of the red light district. If they did not know that this was Soul Society, everyone would probably think that this was a vintage street. To be honest, I am very curious about the taste of the pizza here. Peter stared straight at the shop, the tip of his nose twitching slightly, as if he could smell the smell. When the people next to him heard this, they all showed speechless expressions. They had just escaped from danger and immediately wanted to eat pizza. How big was this guy's heart? This place is called Ryūjin. Little Nemu sat on the edge of a roof, shaking his two white and tender legs, and said lightly, "All the souls that are guided to Soul Society will first live in this place, located in the outermost area of Seireitei where Death God lives. I heard Laud mention this place." Frank came out and looked at the houses around him. He said, "Soul Society can be roughly divided into two parts. Among them, Ryūjin is the area where souls live after death, and Seireitei is the area where Death God and the nobles are located." "No, there are nobles in the world after death." Peter showed an exaggerated expression. "No matter in which world, class is a reality that cannot be erased." A touch of anger and helplessness flashed through Frank's eyes, but soon returned to calm and said, "The location where Tony is imprisoned should be in Seireitei, so the most important question for us at present is how to enter Seireitei from Ryūjin. Can't just walk in directly." Constantine pointed to the direction behind them and said with a speechless face, "The architectural style there is completely different from here. It is clean and neat. It is also paved with white tiles. It should be the place where the noble masters live, right?" The people followed the direction he pointed and turned to look behind. It turned out that behind the Ryūjin where they were located was a clean and bright area. Pieces of white square brick covered the entire ground, and the houses with flying eaves and grey tiles with Eastern style were arranged neatly. Compared to the clean and tidy area, the place they were in was like a slum. It was only about 10 steps away, but it was like two different worlds. "Wow, we are really lucky!" Peter shouted in high spirits. Then, he called everyone over and impatiently walked to that area. "Hey, idiot, stop!" Nemu, who was sitting by the eaves, saw this scene but her little face changed slightly and she shouted to stop. "Peter, don't go over, stop!" Steve realized that something was wrong and shouted. Seireitei was the area where Death God lived. How could there be no defense? After being shouted by the two, Peter stopped just half a step in front of Seireitei. Suddenly, Spider Sense pulled up the alarm. Peter looked up at the source of the danger and saw countless white stone tablets that were close to 100 meters high and weighed hundreds of tons. They were arranged like dominoes, falling down from the sky like meteorites. "My Holy Mother Maria!" Peter's face was pale, and he was scared out of his wits. He almost ran backwards. "Everyone, get out of here quickly and prepare for the attack." Steve's pupils suddenly shrank, and he loudly reminded the others that with the weight and speed of the stone tablets, it would cause a great impact if they fell. However, the next second, the stone tablets fell to the ground, but did not set off a violent impact as imagined. The giant stone tablets that weighed hundreds of tons, like goose feathers floating on the lake, fell on the ground as if they were light, completely separating Seireitei and Rukanga, forming a wall-like protection device. This is Seireitei. Everyone looked at the white stone wall blankly, and the heart was set off by waves. If those stone tablets had caused such a huge impact when they landed, they might not have felt so shocked, but it was the kind of heavy landing that gave them a shock that overturned common sense. It was not difficult to control a stone tablet, and humans could barely do it with their current technology. But controlling thousands of stone tablets at the same time, hundreds of tons and nearly 100 meters high, with this phenomenon that violated common sense of physics, it was an extremely difficult and even impossible fantasy. Don't just focus on daydreaming. Nimue jumped down from the eaves, patted the dust off her pants, and said, "Our goal is not here. If we stay here for a while longer, the guy in charge of guarding this gate should come." The guy in charge of guarding this gate. Steve grabbed the key to this and asked, "Do you mean to say that this reason can lead to the door inside?" "I guess so, but it's best not to have any ideas about this guard." Nimue stood on her tiptoes and raised a finger. She said seriously, "The guard, who is in charge of guarding this Taoist sect, is not a person to be trifled with. I suggest we avoid the battle and choose other ways to enter. Since there is a faster method, how can we not try?" Steve expressed his disapproval and shook his head. "We don't have much time. Of course, we have to choose a more convenient method. Even if we can't, we have to try. At least there is still a glimmer of hope. You asked for it." Chapter 616, Guardian of the White Gate. "Those who barge into this door, die." A deep and sonorous voice rumbled like a dull thunder, and a sound wave that seemed material rushed over, causing the eardrums of everyone present to ache. A figure with a height of 5 meters suddenly appeared in front of them, holding a huge machete, exuding a majestic momentum like a mountain, stopping in front of the big door to Seireitei. "White Gate Guards, Jidanbo Ikanzaka." His left arm was covered with silver leaf armor, wearing a half-shoulder dress similar to a dead tyrant's suit, and his muscles were bulging, like a giant from ancient times. The machete in his hand, with just a gentle wave, let out a shrill whistle, and the air stirred up a strong wind. One man was in the middle, and 10,000 men were in the dark. In ancient times, the heroes who galloped on the battlefield and were known as fierce generals were probably nothing more than this. Everyone's face changed immediately. Thinking of the cow he had blown before, Steve's face turned red. This thing might not be able to defeat him. Are we going to defeat him? Peter opened his mouth wide and said in surprise, "What did this guy eat to grow up? Can humans really grow into this kind of physique?" Natasha looked at the figure of the man and her sexy pink lips slightly widened. "Banner, do you have something to do with that guy? Don't joke with me." Banner did not know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said, "I was caused by the radiation from gamma rays. He is the real one. Stop messing around." Frank couldn't watch it anymore and frowned to interrupt the crowd. "The most important thing now is to find a way to defeat this guardian and then enter Seireitei." We are superheroes, then a one-on-one or a group fight?" Peter asked carefully. Steve glanced at him. "We are a team. Of course, we have to work together when we encounter difficulties. This is the essence of team cooperation." Pfft! Constantine could not help but laugh. "You make it sound so nice. Aren't you planning to gang up on me?" Steve could not keep his face up any longer. He turned his head and coughed twice to cover up his embarrassment. "It's really hard on you. You actually have such moral standards." Frank had always disliked him, so he naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He directly went up to him and said, "Why don't we give you a chance to show off? Do you want to fight him one-on-one?" "No, I think it's good to fight together. After all, everyone's goal here is to save people, not to show off." Constantine smiled slyly. He was not going to be the first bird. Humph! Frank snorted coldly. He could tell that this guy was a shameless bastard. Are you guys done with your discussion? Jidanbo sat on the ground with its knees crossed. The mountain-splitting axe was casually thrown to the side. It held its cheeks with one hand and looked at them calmly. No matter if it's one person or a group of people, just come over. That's what you said. Peter was eager to try. He looked at Steve and asked for his opinion. It seemed that he was planning to go up one by one and test this guy's level. Go, be careful. We will support you from the flanks. Steve thought for a moment and agreed to his request. Peter was the most skilled, and he also had the ability to detect danger, so as the initiator of the team attack and the vanguard to test the depth of the other side, they were all excellent candidates. After getting a clear reply, Peter directly poured spiritual power into his legs and shot out like a cannonball. However, in the next second, to everyone's surprise, and even Peter did not react, a palm-sized palm appeared in an instant with a whistling wind. Bang! Peter took a solid slap, and the whole person was almost stunned. The huge force was like an avalanche. He could not control his body, and with a speed several times faster than when he rushed over, he flew back along the original trajectory, leaving an afterimage that could not be captured in the eyes of others. In the end, he crashed into several houses, and like a hoe, he plowed out a half-meter wide, almost 100 meters long ravine on the ground before he completely exhausted that force. For a moment, there was complete silence. Everyone widened their eyes, their mouths wide open, as if a foreign object had been stuffed in their throats, making an unknown hey-hey sound. A slap, an instant. They did not see it clearly just now. The giant raised his hand and felt a gust of wind blow, and then the later was slapped out. Barton, go and see Peter. Steve's heart tightened. After being slapped so hard, Peter should be okay, right? Barton nodded. Just as he was about to go to the ruins to dig people up, he saw a hand reach out from the rubble, and then Peter climbed out. To everyone's surprise, Peter was not injured at all after being slapped in the face. Frank seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and looked at the giant who was sitting cross-legged. Did you show mercy? This is a warning. Jidanbo supported his knees with one hand and picked his nostrils with the other. He said in a muffled voice, if you intend to force your way into the White Gate again, you won't be greeted with a slap next time. Thank you for your reminder. Steve breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Then his expression became serious. He gave Frank a look and said, although we are very grateful that you showed mercy just now, we must pass through this place, so we can only apologize to you. Humph! After several attempts of persuasion were ineffective, even though Jidanbo had an honest temper, he was still angered. He held the mountain-splitting axe and got up. His mountain-like tall and sturdy body cast a huge shadow in the sun, enveloping everyone inside. Since you want to die, then come at me. No matter if it's a person or a person, I will stop you outside the White Path Gate. Steve raised his hand to stop the others. He looked up at the tall and sturdy body of Jidanbo. He said calmly, don't worry, I'm the only one. They won't do anything. This is also to repay you for showing mercy before. Jidanbo's earlier goodwill had won Steve's respect and decided to defeat him one-on-one. Arrogant foreigner. The veins on Jidanbo's forehead bulged. He seemed to have been angered by this sentence. His voice was like thunder. I have been guarding White Gate for over 100 years. No one has ever passed through me. If you can defeat me today, I will personally open White Gate for you and send you into Seireitei. This is what you said. Without waiting for Jidanbo to reply, the black and red evil spiritual power dyed Steve's right arm in a demonic style. Then he raised his foot and stomped heavily, and the ground split into pieces. Bang! 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 With the help of this force, Steve seemed to have transformed into a human-shaped tyrannosaur. Everywhere he passed, there was no flat ground, and he charged straight towards Jidanbo. The huge vibration was transmitted to everyone along with the continuously collapsing ground, and it felt like the soles of their feet and even their backs were numb. Good. The eyes of the Jidanbo lit up, and the muscles on the arms that held the giant axe swelled up, drawing a perfect arc in the air. Holala! The huge axe blade descended from the sky. The explosion gave off a terrifying power that was comparable to a broken river. It was as if even a mountain in front of them would be split apart by his axe. Steve's neat blonde hair was messed up. He stared at the giant axe that was getting closer and closer, but he did not panic at all. He raised the golden shield in his right hand and turned to the side at the same time. His legs were slightly bent as he took root on the ground, making a standard defensive posture. The members of the association were expressionless. Their hands were covering their ears, as if they had already predicted what would happen next. Clang! The powerful blow of the mountain-splitting axe heavily struck the golden shield. Chapter 617, One-on-One Fight. Jidanbo was frozen in place, maintaining the posture of chopping down. But if one looked carefully, one could find that the arm holding the mountain-splitting axe was trembling slightly. The loud sound of the collision rushed into the clouds, and then set off an extremely violent wind, like a magnificent army of thousands of men and horses galloping past, shattering the flat bricks and stones around them into countless pieces. However, the axe, which was enough to break a mountain, was withstood by Steve without any damage. Especially the silver round shield with the star flag. Under the full force attack of the Jimodan workshop, there was not even a scratch on it. It was still as smooth and perfect as a mirror, reflecting a cold metallic luster under the sun. What a powerful metal! Jidanbo put on a solemn expression and unnaturally took back his mountain-splitting axe. It can actually perfectly absorb my power. I have never seen such a thing in Soul Society. Sorry, my weapon has the advantage. Steve slowly put down his shield, his right hand stroking the lines on the top, and said calmly, although it is only a shield, it can absorb kinetic energy from the outside, so it is impossible for you to win against me. The material used to make the shield was the hardest metal in Marvel World. It also had a strong ability to absorb kinetic energy. As the companion weapon of the US team, its excellent defense was famous throughout Marvel. In the previous life, there were even many busybodies who could break the shock gold in Marvels to judge the strength of the attack. For example, the purple potato Thanos of the Titan race had broken the shield of the beauty team with brute force and became the first attack power in the hearts of many Shadow fans. As expected of you. Frank grinned, thinking that Steve was too cunning. No wonder he had suggested a one-on-one fight. It was because he had been prepared for it. He was fearless because of the special characteristic of the golden shield. The rest of the people secretly laughed. Although Steve sometimes had a stubborn temper and even had a kind of inexplicable honesty, when it came to matters related to the overall situation, there was a kind of American cunningness that could always catch people off guard and use some small tricks. Apart from Peter, the few people present basically all belonged to the human essence. From the short few words of Jidanbo, it could be distinguished that this was a person who respected battle creed, and the Captain America just used this as a point of entry to choose a fair and open one-on-one to defeat him. Obviously, this level was not enough for the Guardians to admit defeat. Foreigner, don't underestimate the Guardians too much. Jidanbo stretched his burly body and unexpectedly threw away the axe. Don't think that you can defeat me who has been guarding the White Gate for 100 years just because of a special weapon. Come on, Guardian. Steve was not afraid at all. He clenched his left arm slightly, and his eyes lit up with battle intent. Take this, foreigner. Jidanbo did not waste words with him. The muscles on the surface of his body bulged, and his heart beat like a high-speed engine. Ever since I guarded the White Gate, no one has been able to survive this blow for 100 years. Drink. Jidanbo exploded like thunder. Thick black blood vessels bulged on the surface of his body. It was as if countless black dragons were coiling around his arm. The muscles that were gushing out to the limit even shattered the armor on his left arm. An indescribable and violent aura suddenly rose up. The hot red blood seeped out of his body, like a burning furnace. An extraordinary heat wave surged in all directions like a raging wave. The burning sensation that assaulted their faces caused the expressions of the rest of the members of the association to change drastically. They were greatly shocked in their hearts for a moment, wondering where this heat came from. The entire street was like an earthquake, and the flat green bricks exploded inch by inch. In the red blood energy that burned like flames, the muscles on the entire right arm of the G-Pill workshop were becoming more and more exaggerated. It looked like a jet black fine iron, and 5 thick fingers tightly gripped the inner wall of the palm of his hand, looking like a giant axe that could split mountains. Dong! The extremely violent momentum even forced the Captain America to take a step back. However, it was this step that made him fall into a hopeless situation. The first clash between the two sides was a heavy momentum, and Steve's retreat was undoubtedly giving up his momentum, which made him fall into a passive state. This move, no one can block it. Jidanbo glared angrily, spitting out a ball of air from his mouth, like spring thunder exploding in his ear. Fist technique, mountain splitter. At that moment, Steve seemed to have an illusion in front of his eyes. A burly man in a beast skirt ran through the raging river, holding an axe with a rolled-up blade in his hand. Using the momentum of opening a path to benefit the people, he smashed the 3 continuous mountains in front of him, and then directed the raging flood. Steve! It was unknown who shouted, but Steve was suddenly awakened. In an instant, the fist that was like a giant axe had already chopped down, gradually enlarging in his eyes. It was a simple fist strike, but it released a power that wanted to shatter the heavens and earth. The air within a few meters was instantly sucked out, forcibly squeezed together by the fist, condensing into a huge axe blade that Hollow had conjured. The churning air around it faintly emitted a dragon roar. Completely subconsciously, Steve raised his vibranium shield again. Knowing that this punch was definitely not simple, he hit in the back and stood with his legs apart, defending against the attack with his shoulder. Boom! In just the instant of contact, the fist's edge released an astonishing power. There was a sound that was 10 times louder than before, and in an instant, the sky was torn apart and shot into the clouds. The wind pressure condensed on the fist finally completely exploded at this moment. Along with the violent hurricane created by the collision, Swords Gully was formed on the surrounding ground. Then, it spread out even further away. The buildings that passed by were easily torn apart. Bang! In the next moment, the fist thrust forward. Even if the vibranium shield could absorb it, it could not resist this terrifying power. Blue veins were all over the face and neck of Jidanbo. With a roar, the power poured out like a flood. Steve felt as if a mountain peak had fallen on the other side of the shield. It was not a tremendous force that could be resisted by human hands. It pressed his legs into the ground. Stop! Steve roared angrily, and a fanatical fighting spirit rose from his eyes. The explosive spiritual power made the giant's right arm change shape. It was closer to the style of the shield, and at the same time, it displayed an even more amazing power. It withstood the continuous pressure of the Jidanbo, and was pushed back. How is that possible? Jidanbo had not expected this to happen. It was pushed to the point where it lost its center of gravity, and its entire body fell backwards uncontrollably. There's nothing impossible. Steve exhaled a breath of hot air, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Open your eyes and take a good look. This is an attack from a giant. The black and red striped arm that looked like a demon's sneer clenched into a fist. It was as if it was pushing a 10,000 jin boulder with great difficulty. Although its speed was extremely slow, it seemed as if the entire world was within its palm. Its majestic aura instantly rose to its peak. A blow from a giant. In the eyes of Jidanbo, this punch could be said to be extremely stunning. There seemed to be an ancient giant roaring in his ears. He waved his arm and poured out all the majestic power. Even the heaven and earth in this area seemed to tremble and lament because of this punch. The vast and mighty spiritual power condensed into a huge beam of light. It plowed a few meters of gully on the ground in front of it like a hot knife through butter, and it directly hit the body of Jidanbo like a tiger without a reins. Rumble! The sky exploded continuously, and the 100-meter-long street collapsed. The terrifying ripples rose into the air like huge waves, crazily wreaking havoc in front of the white gate, destroying everything. The fist pressure that was almost tangible shook countless ripples visible to the naked eye, spreading out at an unbelievable speed, turning into a monstrous wave that rolled over, releasing a roar as millions of thunder tore through the sky. Jidanbo, defeated. The guardian of White Gate, who had been guarding for 100 years, had been defeated by an outsider today. Moreover, he had lost to the power that he was most proud of. It had to be said that this had truly shocked Nimue a little. One had to know that this Jidanbo in front of him was a replica soul that Kisokura had created based on Lod's thoughts. Ordinary death god, who had mastered the Shikai, might not be his match. The speed of growth is so fast. Nimue shook his two white and tender legs and suddenly began to look forward to it. Chapter 618, The Worst Possible Captain to Come. Good, amazing. Peter's eyes were sparkling as he looked at Captain America with admiration. Defeating the burly giant with one punch, as expected of one of his idols, the famous legendary figure. Natasha and Barton breathed a sigh of relief, but they felt a little worried in their hearts. Not long after they entered Soul Society, they met such a difficult enemy, and this was just a guard of the gate. God knows how many terrible enemies there are behind the gate. Dr. Banner on the side did not have time to sigh. He was holding his pulse and calming his emotions with a deep breath. Let's Hulk suddenly ran out of his body to stir up trouble. You! Why did you stop at the last second? Jidanbo leaned against the white door and touched the bruises on his chest. He looked at the man in front of him with a complicated expression. Didn't you release Peter once too? Steve was so tired that he was panting. He wiped off the sweat on his forehead and said, just treat it as returning a favor to you. Moreover, we didn't even consider killing you. This was the truth. They had broken into Soul Society to save Tony. This was a violation of the law. If they were to kill indiscriminately on this basis, it would easily attract unnecessary hatred. At that time, if they really angered Soul Society, they would not be able to bear the consequences. Therefore, before they set off, they had already set the rules. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not easily kill. I've completely lost to you. Jidanbo sighed bitterly and said sadly, whether as a warrior or a man, I have completely lost to you. Your breadth of mind and spirit have won my respect, foreigner. Steve looked happy. In that case, your previous promise. I will abide by it. Jidanbo laughed and said in a loud voice, since I lost to you, I can only abide by the agreement and open the door for you and let you in. Upon hearing this, everyone's faces turned for the better and they all laughed. This was all thanks to Steve. If not for his unique charm and force to conquer this proud and arrogant warrior from both levels, it would not have been so easy for them to enter this gate directly. At least if they won in a group fight, with the unyielding character of Jidanbo, they would not yield even if they died. In the past 100 years, you were the first to defeat me. Jidanbo sounded a little sad, but it was quickly covered up by him. He stood up again and said, but before we go in, I have to remind you of something. What is it? Steve asked. I don't know why you want to pass through this gate. Jidanbo touched the white door, and his eyes showed a touch of loneliness. He said in a low voice, but please be careful. The world behind this gate is very different from Rukanga. Feeling the heaviness in the tone of Jidanfong, Steve nodded seriously. Don't worry, we will be careful. I forgot to ask. What is your name? Jidanbo looked at Steve. You are the first man to defeat me in 100 years. At least let me remember your name. Steve Rogers. The name of the monster. I will remember you. Jidanbo took a deep breath. After his physical strength recovered, he squatted down and raised his hands by the door. He is not going to lift this thing, is he? Peter, who saw this scene, could not help but open his mouth in surprise. That door looks to be at least hundreds of tons heavy. Is it really possible for a human to lift it up? The rest of the people also expressed their doubts. After all, from the battle just now, although the strength of the Jidanbo was amazing, it had not reached hundreds of tons. Otherwise, Captain America would have been sent flying by a punch. How could they still stand here? Jidanbo has the qualification, so only he can open the white door. It was unknown when Nemu appeared next to them, but she seemed to have seen through everyone's thoughts. She explained, the principle is probably equivalent to the identification code of your human world. So that was how it was. Everyone came to a sudden realization and understood this simple truth. Roar! The face of the Jidanbo was red, and he lifted the heavy giant door with both hands. Although he had the qualification to verify his identity, this white door was not opened by ordinary people. It was made of a special material, murderous stone, and had a strong effect of completely isolating Ryūjin. Therefore, if he wanted to open the door, he had to have inhuman strength. Rumble! Along with the gradual increase in strength of Jidanbo, the huge stone door slowly rose from the ground. Then the entire stone door was completely raised above the head and heavily pressed on the left shoulder of Jidanbo, revealing a road to Seireitei. So powerful! Peter's eyes were shining again, and then he turned to look at Banner, who was controlling the heart rate. He asked excitedly, Dr. Banner, can Hulk lift this door? After being interrupted, Bernard's heart rate increased by a few digits. He was so scared that he quickly took a deep breath to control himself. He replied speechlessly, I haven't tried it before. How would I know if Hulk can lift it up? However, it should be possible. However, just as everyone was laughing and laughing, Steve noticed something wrong. For some reason, Jidanbo suddenly fell silent, and his whole person was trembling. From his angle, he could even see the sweat on Jidanbo's face constantly flowing down, like a small stream gathering at the bottom of his jaw. What's wrong? Steve asked. Jidanbo still did not answer him, but stared at the door with wide eyes. Look, there seems to be a person in the door. Natasha was the first to notice the problem. Through the gap next to Jidanbo, she could barely see a figure walking toward them from inside the door. Steve's heart skipped a beat. He took 3 steps and 2 steps, entering the door from the side of Jidanbo. After seeing the figure clearly, Steve's face turned pale in an instant. His pupils shrank to the size of a needle, as if he had seen something amazing. The man was dressed in a white short-sleeved feathered coat, with a black standard-style Death Tyrant outfit. His light purple short hair was casually scattered. On his slightly cold and delicate face, his eyes were narrowed into slits. The corners of his lips curled up in a natural arc. Although his entire face seemed to be smiling, it gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. The man had a white trouser pocket tied around his waist, and ZANPAKUTOU was inserted in it. The breeze blew up the man's hair, and the feathers fluttered with the 2 large sleeves as they slowly walked over like they were taking a stroll in a courtyard. That is. Steve's face was rather ugly. He recognized the white cloak. Among all the death god that Soul Society had, only the 13 captains who were high above could wear this kind of cloak. Without a doubt, the person who came was a captain. 3rd Division Captain Ichimaru Jin. Jidanbo's pupils trembled and he revealed the origin of this captain. Ah, this won't do. Ichimaru Jin had a smile on his face. The guard guarding the gate actually opened the door for the enemy. The moment he finished speaking, a dazzling light bloomed. Everyone didn't have time to react at all. They only felt that it was a bit dazzling. When the light dissipated, they found that the arm of the Jidanbo had been cut off at some point in time. Then, it flew several meters away and smashed into a bungalow. The giant door crashed down. Jidanbo had no choice but to kneel on the ground. It carried the remaining arm to prevent the white gate from closing completely. Its face was almost wet with sweat. The great pain made him grit his teeth. Ichimaru Captain, it's because I lost to them. Jidanbo tried to explain, as the doorkeeper who lost, isn't it natural for you to open the door? What are you talking about? Ichimaru-jin eyes slightly opened, and the cold killing intent made the temperature of the nearby space drop. Even if the guard loses, he must not open the door without permission, and if the guard loses, it means that he has lost the qualification. This time, everyone saw it clearly. No. To be exact, Ichimaru-jin should deliberately let them see it clearly, and slowly pulled out Zanpakuto from his waist. Akoros, Shinso. In a casual and calm tone, the seemingly ordinary short-haired sword instantly shone with a shocking, dazzling light. Steve was one step ahead of them, and in front of Jidanbo, his right hand blocked the attack in front of him. Bang! There was a huge impact, and countless flames splashed on the surface of the vibranium shield. A tremendous force that could not be resisted was transmitted along the surface of the shield, forcefully pushing Steve and Jidanbo out of control. Only then did the people behind him see clearly. It turned out that the bright light was the body of a constantly extending sword. The white door, which had lost its support, fell down again. Chapter 619, Brief Respite. The door fell once again. Even Jidanbo that had kindly helped them had its left arm ruthlessly severed by that person. Moreover, if Steve had not reacted quickly and discovered Ichimaru-jin's intention in advance, he would have used that invincible vibranium shield to block Shinso's fatal blow. Perhaps this straightforward man's head had already been separated from his body. The ground was dyed red with fresh blood. Jidanbo covered the position of his broken arm. Cold sweat oozed out of his face. He bit his lips tightly, not letting himself scream out. Nimue, who had kept everything in his eyes, could not help but sigh at this moment. He thought that Ichimaru-jin was too ruthless. He said that it was just a little scratch. There was no need to do this. It's too cruel. Peter clenched his fists at the side. The smile on his face was completely gone. Aren't they companions? Why are they so ruthless to their own people? Frank's eyelids drooped. He turned back and looked at the door silently. There was an inexplicable disappointment in his eyes. This is Soul Society. He bleed a lot. Natasha frowned and said worriedly, we don't have much medicine with such a big wound. Considering the battle on the back. She did not finish her sentence, but the rest of the people understood what she meant. The next battle would definitely be even more intense, and they didn't have much medicine on them. If they used all of them on the Jidanbo, it would mean that they wouldn't have any medicine to replenish their supplies in the future battles. Save or not. As experienced agent, Barton and Natasha were more inclined to not save him. Exchanging one person for the entire team was undoubtedly a loss. Do we have to watch him die like this? Peter was kind-hearted and could not bear to see Jidanbo die in front of him. Take all of us and change to another person. Barton frowned, I know you are kind, but the problem now is that we have to preserve our strength, especially these supplies. It is impossible for Shield to send a second batch. Peter, sometimes we have to make such a cruel choice. Natasha showed a hint of self-mockery on her face. Between completing the task and the companions, making a choice is a problem that agent must experience. There are too few potions. We can't waste them on a person we just met. Have you forgotten? Peter gritted his teeth and said, if he didn't open the door for us, how could Jidanbo be injured? Save him. At this time, Steve stood up and said in a tough tone as a leader, no matter what, we have to save Jidanbo. He helped us. As the leader of the team, Captain America spoke. Even if Barton and Natasha were unwilling, they could only choose to listen to his judgment. I hope you won't regret it. Barton took a deep look at the American team, and then took out 12 potions from his backpack and handed them to Peter. One at a time. After injecting it, it can quickly coagulate the wounds. Peter took the medicine and walked to the side of the unconscious Jidanbo. He carefully injected the medicine into it. Jidanbo was much larger than ordinary people, so it took 7 and 8 of them to condense the wounds on the broken arm into scabs. At the same time, the medicine had a strong blood-increasing effect. Therefore, Jidanbo, which had lost too much blood, woke up very quickly. How is it? How do you feel? Steve patted Jidanbo and said apologetically, I'm sorry. If not for helping us, you wouldn't have lost a hand. Thank you for saving me. Jidanbo touched his broken arm and shook his head. Meeting Captain Ichimaru-jin, it is good to be alive, just one hand is nothing. In fact, you don't have to worry too much. Nimue came over with her hands behind her back and said, Technological Development Department's limb repairing serum, can regenerate lost limbs. When you go to Seireitei, steal one for him. Technological Development Department? Peter secretly remembered this in his heart. He thought that he could go there to take a look and steal a limb repairing serum from Jidanbo. But how do we get in? Even if Jidanbo can open again, that guy. Steve looked at the door and thought of the man who was as cold as a poisonous snake. He felt scared. I never planned to let you go through the front door. Nimue curled her lips and said, who knew that you would have to try? As a result, you met Ichimaru-jin. It is already the best result to be alive. You mean that we have other ways to go in? Steve asked in surprise. Of course. Nimue put her hands on her hips and said angrily, if you hadn't been disobedient, we wouldn't have had to fight Ichimaru-jin at all. When this was said, everyone blushed a little. Indeed, if not for the fact that they didn't listen to their advice and insisted on entering through this main entrance, they wouldn't have met Ichimaru-jin at all, and they wouldn't have let Jidanbo lose an arm, so they were all asking for it. Sorry, Nimue. Steve was deeply aware of the consequences of being impulsive. We were too impulsive just now. What is the second way? This method is a little risky. Nimue raised a finger and said, first of all, what we need to do is find a place to stay, have a good rest, have a good meal, and then talk about this. Steve did not keep up with her train of thought for a moment. After a few seconds, he looked hesitant. But Tony. Yeah, it's fine. Nimue waved her hand and said, we still have at least a week. There's no need to be in such a hurry. Moreover, everyone has consumed a lot of energy, and so is your spiritual power. Even if we go in, we will be courting death. Captain, Miss Nimue is right. Natasha walked forward and advised, we have just entered Soul Society. Not only do we need to rest, we also need a lot of information. We can't be too anxious. Yes, I agree. Frank, who had been silent all this time, nodded slightly to show that he agreed with Natasha's suggestion. He looked at Steve and said, you are too anxious. This is not a team leader. You should have a mentality and level. Steve was silent for half a second. Looking back at his previous decision, there was indeed a sense of impatience and even a little unreasonable. All right, I admit that I was a little too anxious. Everyone's physical strength is indeed exhausted. Let's find a place to stay first today and then discuss what to do next, Steve said. I think I can provide you with a place to live. When they heard this, they warmly said, although it's a bit simple, there is still a full meal. Everyone followed Jidanbo to his residence on Rukanga. On the way, they also went deeper and learned about Soul Society's situation. Jidanbo lived in an area close to the front. The area of the house was not small, and because of his size, it could be said to be very spacious, and it could accommodate a dozen people. At night, Seoul society, the temperature was a little cold. Everyone sat around the fire in the house and discussed the next action. Until late at night, he fell asleep. Steve sat on the stone bench outside the room and looked in the direction of Seireitei. No one could see what he was thinking on his face. "I know you are not asleep." Frank did not sleep either. He walked to his side and sat down. He asked, "Are you thinking about Tony, or what happened during the day?" "Yes." Steve was silent for a few seconds and said in a low voice, "How much do you think the few of us can save Tony?" Almost zero." Frank shook his head and sighed. "We are just a bunch of sword. The key to whether or not we can save Tony lies in the person controlling sword." Lord Carl. Steve had a complicated look in his eyes. Under the moonlight, his face was full of worry and seriousness. "Why do you think he wants to save Tony more than we do?" "The reason is very simple." Frank patted him on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, "That is, there must be a secret hidden on Tony. He did not want Seoul society to get it. Take one step, take one step." Chapter 620, Diving into Seireitei. The next day, early morning. After a night of rest, everyone had a rough breakfast meal. They bid farewell to the enthusiastic Jidanbo and prepared to leave for the outskirts of Ryūjin Jakka. According to Nimue, their purpose of this trip was to find a person. The master of fireworks in Ryūjin was also one of the former four great nobles, but now the Shiba clan had already declined. The four great nobles of Seoul society, it was said that since the age of Seoul King, the five families had already existed, and they held most of Seoul society's rights. Their status was only second to a few people in the entire Seoul society, as well as those royal families. However, thousands of years ago, in the bloody battle with the Quincy clan, the elites of the five great nobles were almost dead and wounded. One family was completely destroyed, one family was in decline, and the remaining two big families were no longer as powerful as they were in the past. In the current Godei 13th Division, there are only 6 divisions belonging to the four great nobles. Among the other 12 divisions, most of the captains are from civilian birth, and they limit the rights of nobles to a great extent. But even so, the biggest right of Seoul society was still in the hands of those nobles, and the Central 46th they established was a large parliament that was above the division, which could release laws, trial criminals, appointment or dismissal captains. When the rest of the people expressed their open eyes, only Natasha frowned and found some problems. "But the power of the Central 46th room is so great. Do you have no objection to the Spirit King and royal family?" Barton also thought of this problem and added, "Yes, aren't the rights of these nobles a little too great? The right of the Central 46th room is absolutely inviolable in Seoul society's eyes." Nimue did not deny this, but admitted it in a disguised way. "What about the Spirit King and the royal family?" Natasha asked curiously. "Seoul society's social structure should be more like an ancient centralized system. Don't they have any objections?" In front of them, Nimue suddenly stopped. He was silent for a few seconds with his back to the crowd. Then, he said slowly in an unknown tone, "The Spirit King and the royal family have disappeared for a long time." Now, everyone finally understood. No wonder the Central 46th room could hold up the sky in Seoul society's hands. It turned out that the Spirit King and the royal family had long disappeared. That was why the power of the nobles was so great that it was unimaginable. Disappear. A light flashed in Natasha's mind, and she suddenly had a thought. Is it because of the 1,000-year blood war? No. Nimue shook her head, her little face a little confused. She sighed. In fact, before the 1,000-year blood war, the Spirit King and the royal family had already disappeared. Otherwise, we would not have lost so miserably. Everyone looked at each other. It seemed that there was a more shocking secret hidden behind this matter than they had imagined. As he spoke, Nimue pointed to a black chimney not far ahead, as well as a tattered wooden house. She said, "This is the place we are looking for, the base of the Shiba clan." Are you sure that this is the base of the four great nobles, Soul Society? Peter opened his mouth, somewhat unable to believe that this broken place was actually the place where the nobles lived. The others also revealed a thick expression of doubt. In front of them, there was no shelter from the rain or the wind. A few pieces of broken wooden boards were randomly put together, and a broken house that could be stepped on with a kick was comparable to the cardboard house built by the homeless people in the United States. Was it really the base of the Shiba clan? Even the declined nobles would not live in this broken place, right? This was not to the point of falling. It's here. Nimue rolled her eyes and confirmed again, Kako Shiba likes to wander around, so they don't care about the quality of their residence. Anyway, they won't stay in one place for long. Hey, isn't this little Nimue? A woman dressed in revealing clothes with a white ribbon wrapped around her head was sitting cross-legged outside the door, smoking a pipe. We haven't seen each other for decades. Why are you suddenly free to look for me? I have something to ask you for help. Nimue got straight to the point and said, Kaku, let me borrow your cannon and shoot us into Seireitei. Shoot. Us? Everyone suddenly looked a little strange. This was the second way that Nimue said. What are you going there for? Kyokaku took a puff of his pipe and frowned. To save a person. Nimue had no intention of hiding it and said straightforwardly, that guy is very important to brother. He is imprisoned in the Central 46 and will probably be sentenced to death. So we must save him. I know the guy you are talking about. Kyokaku nodded slightly and said while smoking a pipe, it is said that he secretly stole Death God's power and was imprisoned in the Tower of Penitence. I don't know how he was executed, but are you sure you want to save him? Yes. Kyokaku knocked on the smoke pot in her hand and looked up with a smile that was not a smile, as if he was mocking their overconfidence. With just these few people, you dare to go to the Tower of Penitence to save people? Is your brain broken? How do you know that it is not possible? Peter was young and angry. Seeing that someone was mocking him, he immediately could not calm down. He immediately retorted, no matter how powerful those captains are, it doesn't mean that we have no chance at all. Ha 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 ha. Little Nimue, where did you find this silly guy? Kaku was stunned for a few seconds, then could not help laughing. She looked at Peter and said, little boy, courage does not represent strength. Peter was about to argue with her, but Steve grabbed him and shook his head, signaling him to stop talking. Kaku, stop talking nonsense. Nimue said lightly, a word, help, or not? Yes, of course, I have to help. Kaku smiled and slowly got up from the ground. She said, the one I hate most in my life is Death God. I am eager for you to find trouble with them. Isn't it just Seireitei? It is a small matter. Nimue's dignified look relaxed and said, we don't have much time, so can we start as soon as possible? He raised his eyebrows. Are you sure you don't need to train in advance? Nimue pondered for a moment and said, as long as we can land safely, the rough method is acceptable. A bit rough is fine too. Kaku nodded slightly and made a gesture of understanding. He said, don't worry, I guarantee that you will land successfully. The two of them spoke one after another, deciding the fate of everyone present. They did not give them a chance to refute and finalized the next plan. Here, take this thing. Kaku searched through the broken house, took out a crystal ball and threw it to everyone, and then explained, everyone put your hands on it and try to input the same stability as spiritual power. This will form a protective film, like the shell of a cannonball, protecting you inside. The outer wall of Seireitei is made up of murderous stone, which will form an invisible circular shield that can decompose all Reishi composition, so if you want to go in, you must rely on my family's special fireworks shells. Next, I will shoot you to Seireitei as a shell, and then rely on the shell wall formed by this layer of Ryūjin to send you into Seireitei. In fact, I think there is no need to be so anxious. Why don't we get familiar with each other first? Peter shrank his neck and said with some fear. The appearance of the other people seems to be hesitant, ejecting them into Seireitei on the spot. This idea does not sound very reliable. It doesn't matter, believe me. Kaku patted her chest and guaranteed, Kaku, is the most famous fireworks master in Rukonga. A mere Seireitei outer wall can be penetrated for you to see. That. Peter raised his hand and asked weakly, can I trouble you to ask what would happen if something happened to spiritual power, who we sent out halfway, or if the artillery shell did not break through the protective wall? Probably. Will it turn into fireworks? Kaku thought for a moment and added, a huge, gorgeous firework that can make the entire Soul Society see in the day. Everyone's faces turned pale in an instant. Boom! Murderous stone protective wall above Seireitei was suddenly hit by a huge fireball, causing layers of ripples visible to the naked eye, instantly attracting countless gods of death to look up. Then, the fireball slowly squeezed into the protective wall. Finally, after completely breaking through the defense, it turned into several flame streams and scattered, shooting in all directions of Seireitei. The disaster! The disaster is invading! Quickly pull the alarm, the disaster is invading Seireitei. All Death God follow those lights and quickly catch this group of disaster. In 5th Division. Aizen looked at the flowing light outside the room, the corner of his lips slightly outlined a curve, and there was a hint of ridicule in his smile. Chapter 621, Bumped, 1. After the huge impact, the spiritual shield was covered with cracks. Then, under everyone's shocked eyes, a large amount of spiritual droplets from the outside poured into the artillery shell through the cracks, making the pressure inside far stronger than the outside. An extremely fast and powerful air turbulence was forming. In the end, under the pressure from the inside and outside, this spiritual power artillery shell shattered with a bang. Affected by the violent turbulence, everyone was forcibly pulled into 5 groups, and then flew in 5 directions. Because the situation was too urgent, there was no time for them to think at all, so everyone was basically subconsciously hugging the nearest person to avoid being too scattered by the air currents. Snap! 5 scorching hot fire stars split in the sky above Seireitei. At the moment when the accident was forcibly invaded, the 10th Division in charge of guarding sounded the alarm. For a time, in the range of the entire Seireitei, the loud and melodious sound of the copper bell echoed. Dong 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 dash! The 3 bells of the bell meant the invasion of foreign enemies. Death God, who was wearing a black tyrant outfit and carrying ZANPAKUTOU on his waist, rushed out of the various camps and rushed toward the landing point of the 5 meteors in the sky, intending to catch them when the other side landed. Found it, it's the landing point. The landing point is here, which means that the accident must be nearby. Search quickly. Everyone, be careful, don't be alone. A series of urgent shouts, accompanied by chaotic footsteps, sounded. These Death God followed the trajectory and arrived, but they only found a deep pit in the falling place and did not find the so-called accident. Relying on the advantage of the number of people, Death God decided to search the nearby houses carefully. But to their disappointment, after a search, they did not find any trace of the traveler, so they thought that the traveler might have escaped, and continued to search in a further direction. After everyone left. A moment later. A man dressed in a death suit suddenly jumped out from the pit where the fall landed. It was Frank Castell. It turned out that after he fell, he did not choose to leave immediately. Instead, he continued to dig a hole. After burying himself in it, he made some camouflage on it, creating the illusion that he had left, thus deceiving the Death God who had rushed over. A veteran who could survive the southern battlefield was most skilled in camouflage. As for the soldiers who had failed in their disguises, it was very likely that they had already gone to see God. Although he was being hunted down, there was no panic on Frank's face. It was as if he did not care about the people who were chasing him at all. He maintained a leisurely and calm demeanor and patted off the dust on his clothes. Have they been completely separated? Frank carefully recalled the positions of everyone before the shell shattered. Peter and Steve were the closest to each other, and there was a high chance that they would be together after they were broken, so there was no need to worry too much about this group. Hawkeye Barton seemed to be the closest to Constantine. If there were no accidents, with that bastard's fearful character and agent's experience, this group probably would not have any problems. What really worried him was actually the last group. After the shell shattered, Natasha was unfortunately swept into the turbulence. In order to save her, Bernard called out Hulk, who was in her body, and the two of them were carried away by the airflow. If there were no accidents, they would be the first to be exposed. After all, Benner could not control Hulk at all. If he allowed such a green-skinned monster to make a scene, it would inevitably attract a lot of Death God's attention. However, there were good and bad things in everything. From a certain extent, if Hulk made a scene, he could attract the attention of others and help them pass the intensive search in the early stage. Finally, it was the situation on Nemu's side. Frank felt that there was no need to worry at all. It was estimated that even if they all had an accident, there would be no problem on Nemu's side. After all, the human family had stayed in Seireitei before. Whether it was the terrain or the intelligence, they were several levels higher than them. Let's get some information first. Frank thought for a moment and decided on his next target. For him, the most important thing was information. Only more information could make him decide what to do next and how to make a plan to save Tony. At this moment, more than a dozen figures suddenly rushed over from the opposite side. Looking at the obvious black standard clothing and ZANPAKUTOU hanging on his waist, there was no doubt that it was Death God. However, Frank surprisingly did not choose to escape, but calmly stood in the same place and waited. There was not even a hint of panic on the old face full of calm and steady temperament. Yes, he did not intend to escape. And not only that, he also took this opportunity to sneak into one of the teams to inquire about the information. It had to be said that this plan of his was very bold, and it was extremely dangerous. Once he was discovered by these Death God, then he would directly face the encirclement, thus losing the best chance to escape. However, Frank still chose to do this. It was not that he was arrogant or looked down on these Death God, but he was 70% sure that these Death God would not discover him as a fake. First of all, the important information. These Death God did not know that in their group of travelers, 2 of them were Death God. And this also meant that he was now an unknown existence to these Death God, so with this body of Death God and ZANPAKUTOU at his waist, he completely had the conditions to pretend to be the orthodox Death God. Secondly, it was about the division. Before coming to Soul Society, he learned the name and duties of all the division from Laud. As long as he knew these basic information, he could completely pretend to be one of the members of the division and fool these investigating Death God. Finally, it was the current chaotic situation. If he sneaked in peacefully and did not cause any disturbance, he was not good at fooling around and pretending to be the official Death God. But it was because of this sudden intrusion that the entire Seireitei was full of Death God, which just gave him this excellent opportunity. More than a dozen people figures approached quickly. Frank waited in the same place. Which division are you from? Why are you alone? Where did the others go? Death God, who was in the lead, came to a stop and looked at the familiar clothes and ZANPAKUTOU. For a while, he really did not notice that something was wrong. I am from 11th Division. Frank looked calm and said the words that had already been prepared. I want to carefully check the clues and see if the accident is hidden in the vicinity. Others go ahead to chase. Anyway, he was going to join 11th Division, so it was not a lie to say it in advance. And among the 13 Division, he only knew the most about 11th Division. If other division were worried about revealing flaws. Who knew? Chapter 622, Bumped, 2. As everyone knows, in the entire Godi 13 division, only Death God of 11th division, the successive captain, is held by Kenpeki, and he advocates martial arts and fighting, and regards death in battle as an honorable destination. Such a group of almost all combat maniacs, formed into a combat division, every battle will be sure to rush to the front, the death rate is always high, and it is the most in Seireitei. Therefore, Death God of other divisions is generally very afraid of the people of 11th division, afraid of being caught by this group of idle madmen, and then pulled to the training ground to have a hearty battle. It's actually that group of madmen. This group of Death God showed surprise, and there was a trace of fear in their eyes. They looked at Frank as if they were looking at a ghost. Then you slowly investigate, no hurry, we will go first, quickly go. Those Death God shoved and turned to run, not giving Frank a chance to speak at all. Frank was confused. He still wanted to take the opportunity to get some information. Why did these guys all run away when he reported the name of the team? Looking at the back of the group of people who fled in panic, they disappeared in sight in a few breaths. The speed was so fast that it made people speechless. It was like being scared to death by the name of 11th Division. Am I that terrible? Frank scratched his nose, his face was a little surprised, whispered, just hearing the reputation of 11th Division, running so fast. Even if the responsibility of 11th Division is the combat force, should these Death God be so afraid? Moreover, why did those people use the word madman to describe the members of 11th Division? At the thought of this, Frank always felt a little uneasy and wondered if he was cheated by Lot again. Hey, do you know where the accident is? Just as his mind was filled with wild thoughts, a tender voice came from behind him. Frank's heart suddenly tightened, his pupils contracted slightly, and someone suddenly approached from behind him. But he actually didn't notice it at all. To be able to approach silently meant that this person was very strong. After being slightly stiff for half a second, Frank slowly turned around and looked at the source of the sound. He saw a cute little loli with pink hair sitting on the high wall opposite him. She was swinging her two white and tender legs, and a pair of big animated eyes looked at him like a crescent moon. The little loli was dressed in a dead tyrant suit with ZANPAKUTOU on her waist. It was obvious that she was also Death God. There was an armband on her right arm, but due to the angle, he could not see the words on it. It turned out to be a child. Frank breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that even if this child's spiritual power was stronger than him, it should not be too difficult to fool him. Hello, are you listening? The little loli waved her hand and asked again, this fierce-looking uncle, do you know where the disaster is? Frank took a deep breath and shook his head regretfully. He sighed, I'm sorry, little friend. I didn't see any accident. Little friend. Ryūjin. A trace of surprise suddenly flashed through the pink-haired little loli's watery eyes. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. She tilted her head and looked at him with a cute expression, Uncle, which division are you from? 11th Division. Frank faintly detected a trace of uneasiness, but he did not know where it came from. So it is. The pink-haired little loli's eyes were like a crescent moon, revealing a sly smile. Then this uncle, do you know that I am from that division? You are from that division. The feeling of uneasiness in his heart became stronger at this moment, prompting Frank to quietly take a step back and prepare to escape at any time. I am the deputy captain of 11th Division, Kuzujishi Yachiru. The little pink loli grinned, why haven't I seen you? Uncle. F***ck. He hit the main person. This seemingly cute little loli was actually the vice captain of 11th Division, and he foolishly told the other party that he was a member of 11th Division. Exposed. Frank's pupils suddenly shrank. After realizing this, he almost did not hesitate to pick up spiritual power. He condensed his foot and attempted to retreat and escape. However, Just as Frank was planning to escape with Ho-Ho, a pair of strong and powerful hands suddenly stretched out from behind him and pressed heavily on his shoulder. In an instant, a huge pressure descended along his palm. The pressure was as heavy as a mountain, forcing Frank's feet to directly sink into the ground. His bones and muscles burst out with a crackling sound like fried beans. A terrifying spiritual power that was enough to suffocate people was like an endless abyss that enveloped Frank's entire body. It made his scalp numb and he couldn't stop sweating. Frank turned his neck stiffly and looked at the owner of the hand behind him. It was a spike-like hairstyle, and each thorn had a golden bell hanging on it. Sword had a scar across the left side of his face and a ferocious face. He wore a pirate eye patch on his right eye, which made this burly man, who was 2 meters tall, look extremely ferocious. This tall and burly man had a sheathless zanpakuto on his waist. He was covered in a white feather coat. His original sleeve seemed to have been removed, and the edges of his shirt were exposed with saw-like cracks. The front of his shirt was wide open, and he could vaguely see sword wounds all over his chest. Just standing there, this man exuded an unruly and wild temperament from the inside out. His sharp eyes were like swords' blades, sweeping over his body over and over again. Thump thump. Frank instantly seemed to be furious. He immediately took a few steps back and subconsciously wanted to stay away from the extremely dangerous man. "Captain, it's him." Kuzujishi Yachiru sat on the high wall, happily swinging her 2 white and tender legs. She waved to the burly man and shouted excitedly, "This uncle is a disaster. We were the first to find him." "Got it, 8,000 streams." The man's fierce eyes revealed a heartfelt joy, and a faint fighting spirit could be seen. The corners of his lips raised into a flamboyant smile. "Hey, are you the strongest?" "What do you mean?" Frank was stunned and did not understand the meaning of this sentence. "I mean..." The burly man grinned. "Are you the strongest one among the group of travelers?" "Probably not the strongest." Frank cautiously chose a compromise. Although he did not understand the reason why he asked, he did not want to expose his real situation. "Is that so?" The fire in the burly man's eyes dimmed visibly. He seemed to be very disappointed. With a tone full of disdain, he clicked his tongue and asked, "Then who is the strongest person in your disaster?" "John Constantine." Frank did not hesitate at all. He sold his companion faster than instinct. Chapter 623, Bumped, 3. Achoo! Constantine suddenly sneezed. "Lower your voice, what if you are discovered?" In a dark room with no light, Barton looked at the man with dissatisfaction. That group of death god has not gone far. Constantine, who was nestled in the corner, pulled the coat on his body, rubbed his sour nose and whispered, "I didn't mean it. Besides, is this thing something I can control? In short, don't make any more noise." Barton sat at the opposite corner of the house and observed the small screen on his arm. "When those death god are a little further away, we will move to the next hiding spot." The screen on his arm was followed by dozens of small mosquito-shaped creatures on the street outside. FREWBNV. The size of these mosquitoes was extremely hidden, and there was no fluctuation of spiritual power at all. It just so happened that they could bypass Death God's spiritual sense to investigate, allowing them to predict the route of Death God's search beforehand, thus choosing the best hiding spot. Relying on these mosquito monitors, they avoided the first wave of search. And now, they had to find a way to get closer to the depths, and then investigate the place where Tony was imprisoned. "Just now, someone seemed to be talking about me." Constantine touched his messy blonde hair and looked a little depressed. "This is not a good sign. The remaining few people who can still talk about me probably don't want me to live." Barton's eyelids jumped. "How many people have you offended?" "Let me think about it." Constantine thought for half a second, and then grinned, "I can't count the things now. Can the two of us separate?" "Hey? Why?" "I'm afraid that I'll be killed by you." To think that I treat you as a friend, and you treat me like this. I always feel that, the word friend. It doesn't sound like a nice thing to say out of your mouth. It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. The burly man raised his hand and caught the photo. The man in the photo had messy blonde hair and a decadent face of the middle-aged uncle. His eyes were cloudy and there was no light in them. There was not even a trace of hope. It was as if there was endless sorrow and darkness. From a certain point of view, it was the eyes of a strong person. Regardless of whether he was the strongest or not, this was what the burly man thought after seeing this extremely vivid photo. Even the messy blonde hair was determined to be the unruly of a strong person, containing endless sorrow in his eyes. Only men who had experienced mountains of corpses and seas of blood and walked out of the incomparably tragic battlefield would have the eyes of a strong person. Frank did not know that with just one photo, the other party had imagined so much. It's this kind of look, this is the opponent I want. The burly man snapped his fingers and threw the photo to the lowly sitting on the high wall. He pulled out the saw-like zanpakuto that was inserted in his waist. But before I go to find this man, I can get rid of you conveniently. Wait. Frank's eyelids jumped. He did not think that he could defeat a captain. He quickly said what he had already thought of. I know Lord Karl. He asked me to pretend to be a member of 11th Division. I don't know if you know him. Who knows? The burly man raised his eyebrows and seemed to think of something. His smile became more ferocious. It doesn't matter who it is. After running for such a long distance and finally meeting one, let us kill each other. Kill. Frank narrowed his eyes and subconsciously took half a step back. This unknown captain seemed to be even crazier than he had imagined. He wanted to kill someone without a single word. The excuses and lies he had prepared were basically completely useless. Hey, tell me, what's your name? The man looked straight at him with one eye. The scar on Sword's face was twisted, revealing a terrifying smile. Frank looked at the man who was as tall as a mountain in his eyes. He was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, Frank Castell, nicknamed the Punisher. Didn't you just say that you are a member of 11th Division? The burly man slowly stepped forward, and Sword, who was like a saw, drew a spark on the ground, making a harsh sound of friction. Then I will teach you, the rules of 11th Division. When you are determined to kill an enemy, you must report your name, lest the other party doesn't even know who you are after going to hell. Could it be? Frank swallowed his saliva, and a terrible idea quietly emerged in the brain. Sword, who had long saw-like teeth, wiped the ground and the wall, drew a perfect half-arc in the air and fell on the shoulder of the burly man. Accompanied by the sound of the golden bell behind his head, the hoarse voice was like the alarm clock that Death God rang, echoing in this narrow street. 11th Division Captain, Seireitei Kenpeki. Traveler, keep this name in mind. Even if you go to hell, don't forget the man who killed you. In an instant, the sky and earth lost color. Spiritual power, who was so huge that he could affect the sky, attacked like a tsunami. The figure in front of him was suddenly raised by hundreds of meters, like a grand and unreachable mountain, emitting an imposing aura that was like an abyss that swallowed everything and even light and sound. The air suddenly became heavy and sticky, and even breathing needed to be done with all his strength. At this moment, this feeling was as if he was facing the raging ocean. Wave after wave of violent waves of heaven and earth were set off, as if they could smash him, a lone boat at any time. What a terrifying spiritual power! How can there be such a monster in the world? Even when facing Lod, he did not feel such a terrible spiritual power. The muscles and bones only bear this spiritual power, which makes him feel like being crushed by a heavy truck. The whole body seems to be stimulated by electricity. The pores all over the body suddenly shrink and close. Cold sweat instantly seeped out from the back and wet the dead bully. 11th Division Captain, Seireitei Kenpeki. It is said that the only person who inherits the name of Kenpeki is the best in combat ability throughout the entire Soul Society. I just didn't expect that my luck could be so bad. It didn't take that long for the fake 11th Division to collide with the captain of 11th Division. He seriously suspected that he was cursed by the goddess of fate. Are you still not ready to pull out the sword? Zaraki Kenpeki held the jagged Zanpakuto and smiled ferociously. It wasn't easy to find prey. If their performance was too weak, it would be too disappointing. Boom! An extremely cold and monstrous killing intent, as if millions of sword had pierced his body. Obviously, the other side just stood there and did not move, but Frank felt that he had died thousands of times, as if he was shocked by the killing intent, and half heaven did not respond. Hey, give some reaction. Chapter 624, Bumped, 4. Justice, Pale. With the spiritual power, the Zanpakuto turned into two silver-grey spear blades. After Frank uses Shikai, with the improvement of spiritual pressure, he finally felt that the pressure was a little lighter, and even his breathing became much smoother. At least he was no longer unable to move like before. But even so, the gap was still so big that it made people despair. The boundless and violent spiritual power, and the feeling of his Shikai almost did not change much. The posture is good, and the killing intent is also very strong. Zaraki Kenpeki nodded slightly, and commented, unfortunately, the spiritual power is mediocre. There are only about 3 seats. You may be able to fight against ordinary vice-captains, but if you want to fight me, it's still not enough. Frank did not answer. His hands naturally fell, holding 2 silver-grey spear blades. There was no waves in his eyes, like a dead lake, not moving at all by words, firmly locking onto the enemy in front of him. As long as the other side dared to show a trace of weakness, then what greeted him was a storm. A very good look, actually makes me a little excited. Zaraki Kenpeki licked his lips. The indifferent eyes full of killing intent made him feel a trace of blood for a long time, so he raised his left finger to his chest and grinned. In order to avoid ending it too quickly, I will let you make a move or two. What? Frank was slightly stunned, as if he did not understand what it meant. It is the literal meaning. Zaraki Kenpeki fingers slammed his chest and said, I let you cut sword first, no matter where, just cut it. Frank's pupils were shaken, and he could not believe it. Let the enemy slash at will, and no matter where he slashes. Is this guy serious? Hey, what's wrong? Zaraki Kenpeki saw that he did not respond for a long time. He said again, could it be that you think it's too little? Otherwise, I'll let you chop a few more slash. Ugly uncle, do your best. Kuzujishi Yachiru, who was sitting on the side watching the show, clenched her small fist and shouted, this is a big gift from Ken-chan. Don't show mercy. Otherwise, you will die. This is what you said. Frank suddenly lowered his body, stepped on the ground and rushed out. Pride? Martial arts? Shame? At this moment, he threw all of it to the back of his mind. Frank, who had experienced the Vietnam War, had long since understood a principle. There was no sense of beauty in battle. There was only cruelty and brutality. Only by killing the enemy at all costs would he be able to survive. Since the other party dared to underestimate him, he would seize this opportunity. So what if he was the captain? Everyone had mortal bodies. His Zanpakuto wasn't someone to be trifled with. 10 times acceleration, piercing bullet. Frank rushed to a close distance, raised the justice in his right hand, and pulled the trigger one after another. Bang, 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 bang. In the pitch-black barrel, a dazzling fire burst out. The blazing flames wrapped around the bullets, like the roar of a beast, drawing a bright light in the air. It was a spiral-shaped spiritual force bullet. The speed was almost faster than the speed of sound. The power of the bullet even penetrated the air, pulling countless spiral airflow. It was like an invincible sword, straight to Seireitei Kenpaku's heart. Dodge or not? Frank's brain had already planned out all the space that the other side could dodge. Even if Seireitei Kenpaku chose to avoid this gun, he could also use the skill of gunfighting technique to shoot the same 10 bullets in an instant, intercepting from the front, back, left, and right. In other words, Seireitei Kenpaku had nowhere to hide. He was quite confident in his shooting skills. Even if Lord came himself, it was impossible to avoid this set of combos. However, the next second, Frank's eyes widened, and the unexpected happened. Seireitei Kenpaku still stood in the same place and did not make any dodging movements at all. As he promised, no matter where his attack would hit, he would not choose to dodge or counterattack. Bang! Only a violent collision sound was heard. The enhanced spiral bullet hit Seireitei Kenpaku's chest, and it seemed to hit a hard steel plate, splashing a large dazzling fire. Not only did it not run through the flesh and blood, the whole bullet was shattered. The bullet was broken. Seireitei Kenpaku still stood in the same place, as if he was just bitten by a mosquito and scratched the part of his chest that was hit. How is this possible? Frank's pupils slightly spread, and a chill spread all over his scalp. He shot out with almost all his strength, but not only did he not injure his opponent, he did not even scratch his skin. It was like an egg hitting a stone, so fragile that it was ridiculous. But unfortunately, he could not laugh at all. Although he had thought that the gap between them might be very big, he never expected it to be so big. This time, it was really going to be a disaster. The cold sweat on Frank's face flowed down, and fear spread bit by bit. At this moment, he finally understood how heavy the position of captain of Team 13 was. No wonder Nemu repeatedly warned them that if they met the captain of the team, Death God, they must not try to resist or fight. They must do their best to escape. They must not have a single thought to fight against him. Hey, don't be in a daze. I will give you another chance. Seireitei Kenpaku hooked his finger at him and said, whether it is heart, neck, eyes, kidney, you can cut anywhere. If you can cut me directly in this blow, it is best. Give me another chance. Frank took a deep breath and secretly improved his spiritual power. In his heart, he did not feel that Seireitei Kenpaku was humiliating, or looking down on him, but felt that this was an opportunity. In any case, he had to hold it, this last chance. The gap between the two sides was so big that it was difficult to make up for. For him, it was almost equivalent to a natural moat. Only through the other party's similar action of throwing water, he had a one chance of surviving. Frank held the gun blade in his left hand, the muzzle pointed straight to the heart, and he continuously pulled the trigger. Don't rest until you die. The word of salvation. Mighty and benevolent. The boots of Hermes. The power of Heracles. 5 special bullets were injected directly into his body. The violent spiritual power boiled in an instant and wrapped around Frank like a flame. The color that was close to pure black revealed a little evil, and there was an indescribable oppression. It's a little interesting. Are you shooting bullets at yourself? Seireitei Kenpaku looked at this scene with interest and did not intend to stop it. He wanted to see what step this guy in front of him could do, and it was worthy of the respect of Lord Spirit King, but if he was too disappointed, maybe he would cut this guy. Chapter 625, Bumped, 5. In my name. Frank raised his relaxed hands, and slowly opened his posture, give me forgiveness, and enjoy the fire of revenge. Frank stand in a very weird posture, with his feet one in front of the other, standing in a position wider than shoulder width apart, his hind legs squatting slightly bent, his 2 arms one high and one low, his left hand hold the gun straight and slightly downward, and hold the gun in the right hand and place it in front of him. This posture. Seireitei Kenpaku's eyes brightened slightly, a move I've never seen before. Are you planning to attack with 2 guns? The only answer to him was silence. As the spiritual pressure gradually rises, and finally climbs to the peak, it vents out like a volcanic eruption. Gunfighting, fire of vengeance. In the icy voice, mixed with the bone-piercing killing intent, it shook the air like thunder and set off layers of waves. Next moment, Frank stepped forward to lift the gun, and the flames of death suddenly burst out from the black muzzles of the guns. Boom bang bang bang! Spraying gorgeous fiery flames, drawing countless curves in the roar of guns, like a pair of invisible hands, playing passionately in the air, a beautiful waltz called Death and Revenge. One bullet after another, like a torrential rain following the gust of wind, fell crazily without leaving any pause. The density of its bullets is simply terrifying. The area centered on Zaraki Kenpeki and the space within 10 meters nearby are filled with countless bullets with condensed spiritual energy. The fierce wind is like a raging cloud, leaving countless bullet marks on the street. But surprisingly, the target of these bullets was not Zaraki Kenpeki in the center, but constantly collided around him and changed the trajectory, thus forming a small storm. Interesting. Zaraki Kenpeki raised his ferocious hanging eyes, observed the trajectory of those bullets, touched his chin and said, with the help of these bullets colliding with each other, will it generate more kinetic energy? It turned out that this was Frank's purpose. Every bullet shot by Justice is colliding with each other, hitting the ground or the wall at a wonderful angle, and then rebounding with force to increase the initial velocity. And these spiritual bullets that have been accelerated by several collisions and endowed with penetration and acceleration will eventually increase the destructive power to more than several times the original. Woo woo woo. In the next second, the speed of the bullet reached its peak. The bullets with spiral patterns rolled up a huge airflow visible to the naked eye, accompanied by bursts of piercing screams like sonic booms, and slammed into Zaraki Kenpeki's body with unstoppable and terrifying force. Boom! Just one blow of the powerful destructive power caused smoke to explode from the captain's chest. The majestic mountain that seemed to be annoying and unshakable forever shook slightly and took half a step back. However, this is just the beginning. Frank wasn't so arrogant yet, thinking that just with this level of attack, he could kill a captain-level god of death. Gunfighting, the flower of sin. With almost crazy violent output, the enemy is submerged in the blooming fireworks. The justice of the right hand and the paleness of the left hand, the two gun blades are combined alternately, like a Gatling machine gun. In an instant, tons of spiritual bullets are poured out. Maybe the power of each bullet is not enough to penetrate the enemy's defense, but what if the number is doubled to reach 1,000, 10,000, or even 100,000? Water droplets can wear stones. And what he has to do is to use almost endless bullets of spiritual power to aim at a position and attack until it penetrates the opponent's body. Boom boom boom. The violent fire erupted and directly submerged Zaraki Kenpeki in it. Waves of roiling scorching air spread out in all directions, and the huge sound echoed over the entire street. Do not stop. EAV.C. Don't stop. Because as long as he stops for a moment, he will be torn to pieces by this beast. Frank could clearly feel that the man was being bombarded by bullets, and his killing intent became more and more intense and terrifying, as if a peerless murderous sword that killed the wilderness was always on his neck. As long as he relaxes for a moment, the peerless weapon will cut off his head in the next second. Gunfighting, final judgment. This is the last blow. Frank folded his hands, aimed the muzzle straight ahead, and injected all the remaining spiritual pressure into the barrel in one breath. Boom! An unremarkable-looking bullet with a pointed tip and a thick base came out of Justice's chamber. Boom bang bang! But immediately after the roar of artillery fire, dozens of bullets were fired from under the muzzle of the gun. But the real essence of this trick is that the roots of all the bullets are all on a straight trajectory, and the speed of the bullet fired later is several times that of the previous bullet. In the successive bursts of sparks, the bullets collided one after another, and finally all the kinetic energy was transferred to the first fired bullet. Woo woo woo! The kinetic energy of the bullet increased several times, and its speed was so fast that it detached from the retina in an instant, leaving only a series of golden afterimages, and even the air was torn apart, setting off a piercing scream. Boom! Just heard an earth-shattering loud noise, as if buried tons of explosives exploded, setting off a turbulent wind that raged and roared. The entire street was torn apart by the hurricane, and huge smoke rose. After a while, the smoke dissipated. However, to Frank's despair, the tall figure was still standing. It's like a majestic peak, even if the wind and rain hit it for thousands of years, it can't destroy that huge body. Even withstanding such a terrifying attack just now, there was no trace of injury on Seireitei Kenpei's body, not even a single bit of damage. Is it over? Seireitei Kenpei drooped his eyelids, as if he was about to fall asleep. I'm almost sleepy, is this your strength? It's impossible. Frank's eyes widened, his face was as white as paint, and he couldn't accept the scene in front of him. Why, my attack is useless to you? What did you do? What? Is it Zanpakuto's ability? It's not Zanpakuto. Seireitei Kenpei moved his neck, made a crunching sound, and said slowly, actually, it's not a secret. When each other's Ryūjin collides with each other, the weaker one will lose, that's all. To put it simply, compared to your knife that used the Ryūjin to its limit in order to kill me, the Ryūjin I released unconsciously is stronger, so when the two collide, your hit doesn't even scratch me. No. Impossible. Frank's eyes were empty, and it was the first time he felt so powerless, as if something was blocked in his throat. No matter how much effort he put in the eyes of the other party, he seemed like a ridiculous clown. The gunfighting technique that I am proud of, after adding multiple attributes of justice, the result did not even scratch the opponent's skin. Is there anything more ridiculous in the world than this? Really?